is Lori Irish Bauman. I represent District 4, which is Southeast Portland, part of a little bit of Clackamas County and a little bit of Northeast Portland.
Good. Let's go next.
I'll go next.
Okay.
Travis Stovall. I represent District 6, and that is the eastern parts of Portland, and then the cities of Gresham, Troutdale, Wood Village, and Fairview, and parts of unincorporated Multnomah County on the east side, of course.
Director Way.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Kathy Way, and I represent District 7, which is all of Clackamas County.
I'm Linda Simmons, and I represent District 3, which is Southwest Beaverton, Portland, Southwest Portland, Tigard, Sherwood, Tualatin.
Ozzy, you want to go?
Certainly. Hello. I'm glad. Camera, I think, are working now. This is Ozzy Gonzalez. I represent District 2, which is the commercial business district of Portland, southwest into Multnomah Village, and westbound into the northern part of Beaverton, Raleigh Hills area.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any other board members on now? I'm not seeing the. I don't think they are.
I know, Bruce, Kimberly has texted Director Edwards to see if he can connect, and so that's underway.
Right. Well, again, I'm Bruce Warner. I'm with District 1, which is has a lot of Beaverton and then west to Hillsborough, unincorporated Washington County, Forest Grove, and Cornelius. Well, with that, what I'm going to do is get right into the public forum. And for those of you listening or viewing, and Jeff, you want to start? I guess we don't start to. You can start the recording now. And Jeff's on there.
Yes, we're good to go.
Okay, good to go. So the public forum begins usually right at 9 a.m. for a maximum of 45 minutes. And this is an opportunity for individuals to comment on any issues on our board agenda, or anybody who wishes to speak to TriMet about any other issues of concern. And we also get a lot of testimony about things that don't necessarily pertain to TriMet, but we'll try to get them to the right individual or get some contact information for them. It's hard to have a sign-up sheet to know exactly how many people want to testify today. I think our host of the meeting has set up an opportunity and has told folks how to raise their hands so they can be recognized to participate. We're going to limit the testimony to 3 minutes for each individual, and we usually set aside 45 minutes for this. What I'd like to do first, if I could, because we have two elected mayors who would like to speak to the TriMet board, I'm going to ask them to go first. And I have both Hillsborough Mayor Steve Calloway and Beaverton Mayor Denny Doyle. And I don't know whether you're tag team or you know who's going to go first, but I'll let you guys decide and begin.
Well, I suggest we start at the west end of the Max line and then move toward the central city.
All right.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Doyle, for that courtesy, but also thank you, to the TriMet board for the opportunity to share comments this morning and the courtesy to go at the beginning. So my comments are thank you, TriMet. Thank you. These are words that you haven't heard often, or especially often enough in these past few months. So thank you for continuing to maintain service and provide rights. You are honestly providing an economic lifeline for our residents who are transit dependent and unable to work from home. And I'm not just speaking of those in Hillsborough, but I'm also speaking of those throughout your entire service region. Thank you to your drivers and staff who work tirelessly and closely, both literally and symbolically, metaphorically, with our public. And thank you, communication. It has been timely, clear, and regular. I have received calls from Doug and Tom, and inevitably what they share answers questions that I get from residents shortly after. And some of the conversations that I've had with Doug have provided just insight into leadership that has served me well, throughout these last few months. And so I'm personally just very grateful to him for his advice and counsel. I'd like to say thank you for TriMet to your offers of support and assistance, because by being aware of our circumstances in Hillsborough, you have provided assurance in times of uncertainty. And like you, I am optimistic about what lies ahead. We will apply learnings from our current challenges to be more successful in the future. And I'm optimistic about the future because this past week alone, one developer in South Hillsborough sold 12 homes. This is an area where TriMet service is a selling point. So there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and TriMet will provide us the way and the rides to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Doyle?
Yeah, I just like to add my thanks and to the residents of Beaverton and the business folks of Beaverton by keeping people able to get to work when they're allowed to get to work has been so important to the recovery that we so earnestly need to have. Communication from TriMet over these last few weeks, as Mayor Callaway said, has been great. It's been very helpful. It's reassuring to know that you all are taking actions to try to protect the health and welfare of everybody. I'd like to add my thanks to all the first responders, including all the TriMet people that are involved in making sure those who do not have a car, those who need an alternate form of transportation, have that at their disposal. When I go in the office, and obviously we're on the stop, and it seems as if the ridership is picking up on Max, and the transit center starting, that's not too far from the office, is starting to pick up as well. So those are good signs, but we're all in this thing together, and we've got a lot of problems to solve as we move forward that we know about. And I think we'll get there, but I'm just glad you asked me to dial into the meeting, because first responders come in many categories of police are out in the streets daily with what they have to do. And now they also add to the threat of the COVID that may affect them and their families. All the medical workers, all the public employees, the folks fixing the roads, they all deserve our thanks, because they're out there when it's probably not the safest for them to be there. And, bless all of them. And TriMet, just keep up the good work. I'm excited about the changes you're going to be making, and we're there for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you both for taking the time this morning to talk with us. We do appreciate your comments, and obviously your appreciation is well received by everybody. So again, we look forward to continuing our partnership with you on a whole bunch of stuff as we move forward.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Jeff, you want to help me there? I see a few people. Should I call? I see Vivian Satterfield and Charles Kraft. You want me to call them, or you want to call them up?
Yeah, we'll start with Charles. And he asked to share his video, so give me 1 second to make that a possibility. Okay, Charles, go ahead and speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I submitted a written testimony yesterday that I think most of you received. So good morning, Board of Directors, Mayors Callaway and Doyle. My name is Charles Kraft. I'm a resident of Beaverton. I live in the Raleigh Hills neighborhood. A budget is a moral document. I'm speaking out to urge that you do not approve the 2021 annual budget until it reflects the values of the communities TriMet serves. I demand that you not go forward with this budget that allocates $41.5 million for the Safety and Security Division. I demand that the 62 transit police officers be immediately removed from TriMet, and the Safety and Security Division should invest in unarmed professional mental health intervention and trained de-escalation personnel. According to TriMet's website, most crimes reported on bus, MAX, and WES are minor incidents and property crimes such as vandalism. There are fewer than 2 reported incidents a day, which is about 1 in every 231,000 rides. We do not need armed cops patrolling TriMet. Terrell Johnson was 24 years old when he was shot and killed by Portland Police Bureau officer Samson Agier. Agier and the 2 other officers who encountered Johnson were part of TriMet's transit police. First, a transit police officer from West Lynn police failed to de-escalate Johnson, who was clearly in a mental health crisis. Then, 2 more transit police arrived and escalated the situation, which resulted in Ajir killing Terrell Johnson. If TriMet did not have transit police, Terrell Johnson would be alive today. This is an excerpt from a Mercury article from June 7th, 2017. Johnson was born and raised in Portland along with his brother Tobias by a large, loving, and deeply religious family. He loved his faith, music, skateboarding, basketball, and football. He attended Cleveland High School until his junior year when he dropped out and eventually earned his GED. You were happy when you were with him, says Jesse Howell, who met Johnson when they were teenagers attending the same church youth group in Portland. He describes Johnson as one of the most genuine people he has ever known, even when he was going through his shit. Please, imagine what would have happened if instead of transit cops, transit mental health professionals had been dispatched to the scene to appropriately de-escalate the situation. Take a second to imagine that. I imagine that Terrell Johnson would be 27. As someone who has ridden TriMet their whole life, I do not wish that this part of the community contributes to the brutal history of policing in the United States anymore. Disband TriMet Transit Police and reinvest in de-escalation and health and mental health support that serve your riders and provide real safety and security. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you very much, Charles. Next, I see Vivian Satterfield.
Hi, am I audible to you all?
You are.
Excellent. Good morning, TriMet board members and staff. My name is Vivian Satterfield. I work at Verde, a community-based organization located in the Cully neighborhood. I actually want to first start this morning with reflecting that at this very time is the second day of the sentencing hearing of the person who perpetrated the racist max stabbing attacks and murder on the max system. My thoughts and strength I'm sending to Demetria Hester, the victim and of these attacks, their family, especially this morning. I just want to note that the presence of police on the system did not prevent the murders that morning. The devastating impact of the pandemic on Black, Indigenous, and people of color and working class people has resulted in a prolonged and profound economic crisis that's also laid bare, without a doubt, the underlying foundation of all American crises, racism and classism. So without equity at the center of our decision-making, we risk replicating and reinforcing the same ills that made this pandemic a global calamity. And so to ensure that equity is prioritized, I'm going to urge this morning for you all as leaders to pursue policy solutions that embrace some values and principles. And I do want to reference that I pulled these from the Greenlining Institute, which is a policy research and leadership institute working for racial and economic justice. I know that their work is very well respected, and that's why I want to lift up their values and for your consideration of diversity, equity, and inclusion, of partnership and collaboration, of transparency and authenticity, and accountability. I just want to reflect that as TriMet was undergoing some public listening sessions, I attempted to engage a number of monolingual Spanish speakers from the Cully neighborhood to come and testify, and was very, very disappointed in getting a report back that the listening sessions were not a meaningful way to engage. The WebEx platform is really, really clunky. Even I had challenges as someone who pretty much has like downloaded Zoom as an extension of my professional life in recent months. And the listening sessions were really just an opportunity. It was not a meaningful opportunity for community to give feedback. And so I'm concerned that that is the basis for which this board is now saying that they had sufficient public engagement in order to pass this budget. I just want you all to really think about that. And the other areas I'd like to lift up this morning is articulated by my colleagues at Unite Oregon Health and Rose City Justice in a submitted testimony. We were unable to get that submission before the noon deadline yesterday, but I did email it. So I do hope that you receive both the letters by Unite Health and Rose City Justice, as well as a number of signatory organizations echoing those calls. And the calls in which we want to see the values and principles that I lifted up earlier, we want to see those applied to decriminalizing transit, ending fair enforcement, ensuring that frontline transit workers receive all the protective gear they need and hazard pay as well for these tough jobs, and ensuring that we have dedicated and sustainable funding for transit at a time when cities and states are pushing a narrative austerity. And I know I'm over time, but I just again want to emphasize that we must remove barriers for participation of individuals. Thank you so much for your work, and I look forward to leadership from this board to do the right thing at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. We did get a lot of information. I read about 60 emails this morning from various folks on various sides of the issue that you just described. So thank you for your testimony today. Next we have, is it Lee Helfand? Jeff, is that correct?
Yes, Lee, you are unmuted. Are you there, Lee?
No, not hearing him, or he's having trouble.
Yeah, it looks like we're having trouble.
Yeah.
Lee, you can send me a chat if you can get your microphone working, and we'll come back to you. I do have 2 more in the chat that came in. Doesn't look like they can raise their hand, but I would like to call on them.
Please do.
So the first is Tristan Isaac, and while I'm unmuting him, I would like to note, if you are called into this meeting on the phone and you want to provide a public feedback, please dial *3. If you are not in the meeting, you were just joined on the phone. Okay, so with that, Tristan, go ahead and test your audio.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Awesome. Good morning, TriMet board members. My name is Tristan. I'm a member of Bus Riders Unite. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. So let me begin by saying, wow, like what a month, huh? Who could have imagined 30 days ago that we would be where we are now? You know, something's in the air. There's a viral sensation that's sweeping the nation. I'm not talking about coronavirus. I'm talking about those 3 little words, 6 simple syllables, 1 plain phrase that drives people wild. Abolish the police. We're in a historic moment. I was honestly afraid the murder of George Floyd would just become a statistic like so many before him. But I miscalculated. The movement has grown like a wildfire. It's unstoppable, and it won't be placated by anything less than that simple demand. We've tried reform, we've tried body cams, we've tried implicit bias training. We've tried community policing, but cops are uniquely resistant to any form of accountability. Here in the Portland Metro, the Transit Police Division, that's y'all, stands out as an even more opaque and unaccountable policing body than almost any other. A recent report by the City Auditor's Office highlighted its many shortcomings, such as lack of clear directives, supervisions, and policies for filing complaints. From qualified immunity to the officer's Bill of Rights, to the shocking political clout of police unions, the bad apples keep getting away. And that's because it's not the apple that's rotten, it's the whole system. And it's long past due that we tear the whole thing down. So how does TriMet fit in? Well, you fund the Transit Police Division. You spend somewhere in the vicinity of $20 million annually to pay the salaries of some 62 police officers from a dozen different agencies to staff your division. And what do those agencies then do? They take that savings, turn around, and hire even more cops. The Transit Police Division is little more than a subsidy to law enforcement throughout the Portland metropolitan area. TriMet is in a unique position to have a huge impact for this movement. By canceling your intergovernmental agreements, you can effectively defund not 1, but dozens of law enforcement agencies. I call upon the board of directors to provide the kind of leadership that's being demanded by thousands of people in the streets every night. We're barreling towards an unprecedented recession. An economic downturn means austerity, but history has shown that the only public services to ever avoid such budget cuts are the police. In 2009, TriMet faced a budget deficit of $31 million due to the recession. They cut service, operations, and programs like the Rider Advocates while hiring more cops than ever. Do not repeat this mistake. Bus Riders Unite demands that you cancel all of your police contracts, defund and abolish the transit police, and use the money saved to reinvest in community-oriented safety initiatives like the Rider Advocates, and also give hazard pay to your operators and the people who keep your buses clean and safe. Cops don't protect us, we protect each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And your timing's impeccable. All right, Jeff, who's next on the list?
The next person on the list is AJ Mendoza. AJ, go ahead and say something.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can
Yes.
hear you.
Good morning, members of the TriMet Board of Directors. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is AJ Mendoza. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm a resident of Clackamas County, and I'm here in my capacity as the president of the Communication Workers of America, Local 7901, to speak in solidarity with the members of the Amalgamated Transit Union, Local 757, who are employed by First Transit, and especially those who have been laid off already as a result of the pandemic. My union lobbied CWA in support of the CARES Act. Through the provisions of that legislation, TriMet has received about $185 million. That money, to be clear, was not intended to be a rainy day fund. It is to be used, and in part to avoid situations like that being faced by the employees of First Transit. And also, it must be said that after this pandemic is in the rearview mirror, we really need to bring the non-fixed route service back in-house. TriMet, this board, has the funds and the directions from Congress. On behalf of the 700 members of my union, we implore you to follow the letter and the spirit of the CARES Act and immediately take action to ensure that the workers who keep TriMet running, not fair enforcement, not the transit police, are returned to work. The pandemic was not the fault of essential workers, and their sacrifice in keeping the system running speaks volumes. This board must act now to do what is right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next is Kim Marks, and I see him here twice. I see him here 3 times, so I'm going to try the first one and we'll see if that works. Kim, go ahead and say something.
Can you hear me?
You might
Yes.
might have 2 microphones on.
Kim, it looks like you've probably got the WebEx playing back into your microphone, which is creating a reverberating effect. If you can turn down all of your audio sources except for the one you're speaking into, and we'll try again. Okay, try again, Kim.
Well, I think, and I apologize for this, but I'm going to keep speaking because I think this is one of the points I want to raise.
Okay, we can hear you now.
This platform is not useful for people who are not computer literate or who have never used this program. You all need to put something on your website to explain how to do this or use this program. Second, for people who are visually impaired, this thing is a nightmare. You cannot navigate without having to use or to not use a magnifying system. I urge you all to put something on your website to explain how to use this platform if you're going to continue to use it, including where things are on the platform. Having said that, the purpose of my testimony is to represent the Rosewood Initiative, who I am the Director of Transportation Equity. I want to echo what the other speakers have said about this budget and the need to reallocate the resources for police funding to other areas, including people who are trained and experienced in de-escalation, mental health, and other ways of addressing safety concerns on your system. I am going to deviate a little bit in agreement with some of the comments. As a regular transit user and a dependent transit user, you need to do a much better job working with your drivers. Not all, but a significant majority or significant number who, in fact, have a tendency to escalate situations that do not need to go where they go. I have seen numerous occasions where a driver has started a conflict with a passenger or has continued behavior that escalates situations. I filed a complaint with or through your process about an incident last year where a driver essentially almost let a riot on her bus because the other passengers were angry with an individual. That driver did absolutely nothing to de-escalate other passengers. I had to stand up and tell them to quit doing what they were doing. That is not the only incident I have seen where drivers are the reason for the problem. Now, most of these situations regard fares. It is a simple fix that we move away from fare enforcement and that we move towards a free system. That would deal with the majority of driver passenger conflicts.
I'm
The
going
other
to
thing is,
wrap up
if
soon
you
here.
had people who actually could help drivers, as mentioned earlier, to deal with these situations, then the problems that currently require police would not be an issue. Thank you.
I'm going to have you wrap up now. Are you done?
Yes, I just said thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. And I'd say for anybody listening about this, we ought to hang around because I believe that the general manager will kind of give us some updates in terms of what some of the plans are for the budget and getting to some of the issues that many of you were talking about here this morning. So again, thanks for the comments. And I'm sorry you had problems with the platform. We're new with it too. Jeff, who's next?
Okay, next we're going to go to Shirley Block.
Oh, good.
Good morning, members of the board. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Good morning. I'm here today to speak for the members of First Transit that have been laid off because in the result of the COVID-19 panic. As you are aware, Congress had enacted CARES funds for TriMet that have received $185 million. This money is not a rainy day fund. It should be used to get those folks back to work. At this time when COVID-19, our members need their medical and their paychecks, a regular paycheck. I would like to see TriMet pass this money through to get these folks back to work. There's plenty of work that these folks can be doing with the assistance of TriMet doing what they should be doing. There's no need for people who are out there braving the buses, these small buses, when you can put 2 or 3 people on these vans and to have significant spacing for them. I encourage you as president of ATU 757 to do the right things for these members. These are your members too. You need to bring them back into house. Quit contracting out all this work. That should be our work in-house, not contracted out. I would also like to talk about the rider advocates. I too would like to see rider advocates back on the system. We had a safe system. Unfortunately, TriMet got rid of all the rider advocate, and the people in the community are the ones that people respect and look up to. Please bring the rider advocates back to TriMet. I encourage you for safety reasons out there. It's so much violence going on in the streets now. Don't wait a year, Doug, to do this. I'm asking you as a leader and you as a leader to bring the rider advocates back to TriMet. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Shirley. Appreciate your testimony this morning. Jeff?
Okay, we're going to go to, and I apologize if I say your name wrong, Richa Pudial.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
You actually said it right, so thank you. Hello, good morning, President Warner, Board of Directors. Thanks for the chance to speak with you this morning. My name is Richa Podell. I'm the Advocacy Director at the Street Trust, a membership-based nonprofit here in the Portland Metro region working to improve conditions for walking, biking, and taking public transit. I myself am transit dependent, and the Street Trust is also an active member of TIAC. I know this is a challenging time for transit in general and for TriMet in particular, so I do appreciate the work that y'all are doing to make a number of important decisions. As you all consider the budget today, the Street Trust and many of our partners that have spoken already are really coming together to demand the end of TriMet's relationship with any and all police presence on our transit system, including contracts with police, PPB, with local police and sheriff departments, contracts with private police forces and security organizations, and really hoping for a public commitment to an allocation of future funds towards policing. I think especially in this moment that we're in and the collective sort of awareness that we're in, and then coupled with the need for transit agencies to be creative in their budgeting, the safety and security portion of the budget for TriMet should really be cut more than the 1.8 million that's been kind of floated and considered. I also just echo the sentiments shared earlier about the listening sessions that were held last week. I encouraged a lot of folks in my community to show up to those, and kind of heard back that folks didn't feel like they had a chance to give input to TriMet. Rather, it was more of a presentation. And so I think for these large decision-making processes around budget, it's really crucial that as a public agency, we're creating real meaningful avenues for people to have their voices heard. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Jeff, we got the next one?
Yes, I'm going to go to our first user who raised their hand on their phone. I do not know your name, but when I unmute you, you'll hear a beep in your ear, so that will tell you you can speak. And so our first call-in user is unmuted.
Hi there, members of the board. Thank you so much. This is Clackamas County Commissioner Sonia Fisher, and I really appreciate your time to take our comments today. I want to reference a May 26th letter that our Board of County Commissioners sent to you and make sure that that gets put in the official record regarding the Ride Connection program. We are very concerned in Clackamas County about any potential cuts to that program. Well, since we submitted our letter, we have an understanding that there has been some funds identified to backfill the Ride Connection program for this next year. We definitely want to impress upon you the importance of these resources. In Clackamas County, these funds provide seniors and people with disabilities very critical transportation services. And not only do they help fund drivers for our most vulnerable residents, they also provide the foundation to leverage many volunteers that provide countless rides. Well, maybe not countless, we probably can count them, but many, many rides for our seniors. As just an anecdote, one of the most rewarding events that I attend as a county commissioner is for our volunteer appreciation, and just talking with our volunteers that do these rides for our seniors and people with disabilities. They are life-changing, not only for the people that receive the rides, but also for the volunteers that provide them. So this is a program that delivers far more fruits than the finances that it contributes, and I want to encourage you to find long-term funding for this program. These are the most important services that we provide, and I so appreciate your service and your dedication to those who are most vulnerable in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your testimony. And we also believe very, very highly in Ride Connection and their services, and they've been our partner for a long time, and we hope that will continue. Jeff?
Okay, I'm unmuting the next called in person. You'll hear a beep in your ear, and then you can speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
All right, I'm Pam Wren. I'm the CEO of Portland Patrol Incorporated. I'm an employer, I'm a resident of Portland, and I'm a user of transit. Our company values the partnership and the support of the police that are dedicated police officers to the transit division. And we want to retain that dedicated police for several reasons. As an employer, we strive to offer safe transportation alternatives for our employees. Many of them use public transit on a daily basis. Our office sits on the Max line. Not all security and police interactions are due to mental health issues. In the past few weeks, we've relied upon the transit police for their quick response to deal with issues that are beyond our scope of practice as customer safety officers. We have reconnected 2 juvenile runaways, assisted in the arrest of an alleged sexual assault suspect. Without that dedicated police, the response time would be greater to respond to those things, and we want to make sure that our employees and residents of Portland have a safe riding experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony this morning. Jeff?
Okay, and the last call-in user that we're going to unmute is going through now.
Hello, members of the board. My name is Michael Cornelius. I am an international representative with the Amalgamated Transit Union. Thank you for taking the time to hear me out today. I call in support and in solidarity for the members of Local 757 employed by First Transit who have been laid off. I needed to reach out to you today because on April 23rd, Chairman DeFazio of the U.S. House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure sent you a letter informing you that you had a right to use the approximately $185 million of CARES Act funds to renegotiate the terms of your revenue agreement with First Transit to ensure that those workers were treated no better or no worse than the public sector workers. And as President Block indicated to you, that this does highlight the problem with privatization, and oftentimes, and we've seen since this outbreak happened, layoffs have happened almost 3 times as much in the private sector as they have in the public sector, which means, once again, private sector employees are pulling from the system, and it actually becomes more costly to privatize. What we are attempting to do is encourage you in the most respectful way possible to use your resources to ensure that these now approximately 100 people who are laid off as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic or returned to work or in some other way taken care of through paid administrative leave or some other means. You have the resources, you have the ability to do this. Congress has given you instructions that you have the right to do it at your discretion, and you're not prohibited by law. And any argument that you don't see the need to use taxpayer dollars to quote unquote bail out employees of a private company, I'll remind you that Congress has given you this direction and authority to do that these workers are currently receiving taxpayer dollars on unemployment, which expires the end of next year, the end of next month. And once that extra bump on the unemployment tax ends, these 100 people are going to very likely be trying to find a way to feed their families, keep their homes, or go on other government assistance programs unnecessarily. We think that your budget allows for you to ensure that these workers are taken care of. We certainly appreciate you acting swiftly to end these unnecessary layoffs. And with that, I'll yield the rest of my time.
Thank you very much for your comments. Jeff, you're saying that was the last person who signed up?
That is the last person that I've had a request to speak from, yes.
All right. Well, we're right at 9:45, so I think I'm going to close the public forum, and I want to thank everybody who is listening today, and that we encourage you to continue to listen. to some of the reports that will be coming forward, because again, there's a lot of interest in the items that were discussed today in the public forum. So with that, what I'm going to do now is call the regular meeting for the TriMet Board of Directors for June 24th, 2020 to order. And we'll get right into the normal agenda. And the first items on the agenda are the board reports. And the first board report is from the Committee on Accessible Transportation, or as we call it, CAT. And Director Lori Irish Bauman, you want to give us a report this morning?
Yes, good morning again, everyone. I have a very short report. The CAT did have its regular business meeting on June 17th. Most of the agenda consisted of updates from TriMet staff. So here's what they heard in the meeting. Patrick Williams of TriMet Security and Emergency Management gave a presentation, and he answered questions. He said that in the past year, there have been significant efforts to develop a new model for security on the system. He mentioned in particular plans to more effectively address individuals experiencing mental health challenges. He said that de-escalation training has been provided to fare inspectors and other staff who interact with the public. Next was a detailed presentation about the Better Red project, including plans to begin construction in spring of next year. Next was a presentation about the Steel Bridge improvement project that will take place this summer. CAT members asked questions about how passengers will be accommodated during the shutdown of the bridge. And finally, there were the regular reports from Lyft, First Transit, and Broadway Cab. And those reports focus primarily on steps that are being taken to avoid transmission of the coronavirus on vehicles. And that is the report. You're muted.
Bruce.
Thank you. I don't see. Thank you. I'm being nice, muting my mic. But are there any questions or comments for Director Bauman this morning? Hearing none, then I'm going to move on to the finance. Wait a minute. Keith, did you have a Keith? Did you
I had my hand up.
You did, and I missed it. But thank you. Go ahead.
I guess I just had a question. Laura, you were talking about de-escalation training to the staff. What is the extent of that? Is that a 2-hour training, an 8-hour training? What do you have any details on that?
What CAT heard that the training is being provided very broadly to the public-facing staff, but I will ask Doug or others to answer details.
Thank you.
It's Doug. I think I don't know the specific details, Director Rivers, but we can get that for you. No problem.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll go on to Finance and Audit Committee. Director Stovall.
Good morning. Good morning, board members, staff, and stakeholders and general public. This morning we held our regularly scheduled Finance and Audit Committee meeting, and we covered 3 items. The first item was the updates to the potential budget between the approved and now we'll be referencing the adopted budget today, or we will actually be looking at it and discussing the adopted budget, the opportunity to adopt the budget later on in the board meeting. So we're going to be going through kind of those budget changes or adjustments that have happened since we approved the original budget. As everybody knows, we've seen a lot of different changes as we've been talking about this morning since we had the approved budget and moving towards the potential adopted budget. So we're going to reference and review some of those changes that we discussed and talked about and had presented earlier this morning in the Finance and Audit Committee. The second item we covered was the construction projects and process. Take a look at some of those things that have changed and moved, and I believe we will probably potentially at some point have some additional updates as a board. Some projects are going to continue forward. Some of those CIP construction in progress or in process are going to be moved out potentially based on what we're experiencing from a budget standpoint. And again, that's going to be something that will come to the board later as we begin to have a better definition of kind of what those projects are, which ones will be moved forward, and then which ones will actually be postponed or delayed to a future date as the budget gap is better identified as we continue to move forward as an agency and an organization. Lastly, we discussed a potential project in regards to the transit-oriented development, in regards to affordable housing. As many of us know, the regional bond was Metro Regional Bond was approved, and now organizations are moving forward with plans and opportunities to look at different transit-oriented development projects. And so the Finance and Audit Committee got a quick briefing on a potential project that's going to be discussed and looked at as we continue to move forward. And we're going to continue to see more of these. It was really kind of in the original stages of just kind of development and discussion as it moves towards some changes or adjustments in the future. And again, anything like this would come through the board as that presentation is kind of better defined and additional numbers are ready for presentation. Those were the three key items that came in front of the Finance and Audit Committee this morning. Are there any questions? Also, President Warner and Director Simmons are part of the F&A Committee, Finance and Audit. So if either of you feel like there's something I missed, please don't hesitate to opine and kind of give that additional direction. Otherwise, if the board has any questions, happy to answer them.
I see Director Way has her hand up, so Director Way. Is she muted? I can't hear her.
She's not muted.
She's not muted, but we can't hear her.
Oh, there's Director Way, did you have a comment or a question? I guess she can't hear me. I wanted to make a comment, Travis. I don't know whether you mentioned where the project was, the transit-oriented development project was that we were looking at. It's at the Hollywood district, the station, and it's really quite an exciting opportunity to redevelop and get some people in that area, living in that area, more eyes on the street and more people living in affordable housing right next to our transit station. So it's really going to be a great project. I believe it's actually going to get pulled off. It looks like the funding is probably 95% there. Director Way, you with us now?
Yes, I'm sorry about that. I must have gotten kicked off the audio. This was, and I don't know where things got left off, but this was just a question that I had for the Finance and Audit Committee.
Please.
So I'm very glad to hear that there's some developments that are happening around the TOD, the transit development, oriented development projects. I know that we as a board voted on that last month. So, and Director Stovall, it sounded like the board will also be getting an update in terms of those projects. Is that correct? Mm-hmm.
So yeah, of course, as I referenced, I think a few months back when we were talking about TOD, the TOD kind of requirements and things that we set forth and the board decided on, as you just referenced last month, that was kind of a construct and an essential opportunity to give direction as future projects move forward, and we have a more comprehensive plan to address TOD. At this point, there have been projects that have been talked about, discussed, and this is one of those projects, the Hollywood Transit District, that's been kind of moving forward during the same time, and I believe there's probably others under conversation or kind of discussion. So yes, absolutely. As these projects become a bit more defined, then that's when these projects will come to the board for kind of the board's input, and potentially also we'll have an opportunity to share it with the board again as we move forward, potentially in kind of smaller groups, just to be able to kind of give some information as we're working towards kind of the overall approval at some future date.
Travis? Kathy, I believe what was said also in the Finance and Audit Committee is that the Hollywood project would come to the board. I think, Doug, correct me, I think it is July.
Yes, we will be bringing this to the full board. The parts we can that don't violate confidentiality in a public realm. There's a lot of commercial negotiations going on, but the whole concept will be brought to the board meeting for July.
Okay, great, thank you. And then just the second question that I had, and then I'll be done, is around just really what we're hearing from community members in terms of us taking a look at our security, the safety and security bucket of work that TriMet does in hiring fair enforcement officers and working with various law enforcement agencies. And I am just curious, just to hear from committee members, if you have been hearing, potential shifts in terms of allocation around some of those resources. I know there was the 1.8 million that, is a start, but I am just curious if there's any other additional information or updates that you can provide.
So outside of the 1.8 million, there's not been further discussion in regards to a distribution or reallocation of the funding. Kind of, as you know, we're going to be considering the budget this morning, and with the budget that gets produced and adopted, it's the buckets that are more so well defined in regards to, this is the amount that goes into expenses based on the revenue. So that's kind of where we start, is that bucket. We do have flexibility within certain amounts to be able to reallocate within that. And so we do have that flexibility as a board and an agency as we move forward. Based on the conversation, that I've been a part of, at some point, it needs to move, from the Finance and Audit Committee to the board, so that the board has the discussion. I mean, I think what you're asking is more of a board type of conversation rather than just Finance and Audit Committee. We look more so at the structural, and then the staff also looks at the structural, looks at, all of our allegations, and we pull that stuff together. I think I'm confident what you're asking is more of the board conversation, which I'm sure we're going to have today as we discuss the budget. So the 1.8 million that's already been reallocated, that, we've already had that conversation. I think as we talk about different amounts, larger amounts, any type of reallocation, I think that would happen at the broader board discussion. As you already know, we've got a number of public comments, written comments that we've all received and read through. And so that will also flavor the conversation. So that's where we are. I think it's a broader board discussion rather than just being tight as the Finance and Audit Committee. President Warner and Director Simmons, you can certainly chime in here.
Director Way, I guess I would say that, again, based on what I see, there's lots of opinions about what we should be doing as an agency, both in terms of defunding or eliminating the transit police, to folks saying we ought to keep it or increase it. It's clear to me there's going to be a different model for TriMet in the future, and we need to get on that and figure out what that is. And I think that's part of the allocation of budget, is to really take a hard look at that so we can be prepared when Portland pulls out of their contract at the end of this calendar year. And maybe I'll ask Doug a little bit when we get into the budget, or if he wants to do it now or in his report, to really kind of outline what you think we need to do to really move us in a way that addresses safety and security in a way that's consistent with what the community wants, but also ensures the safety of our riders and our operators and the public out there. So I don't know whether you do it now or during the budget, but one of those, I think it's appropriate and timely to get that discussion going.
Well, if you're comfortable, I could do it now, but it was actually the first item I really wanted to talk to, actually, in the general manager's comments anyway, President Warner. So I can, I think that's coming up pretty quick.
I think it can wait if that's okay with the board. I'll just have him do that under his report then. All right. Other questions or comments for Travis? I'm seeing none, so we're going to move on then to the Transit Equity Advisory Committee, or TEAC as we call it. Director Gonzalez?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Very good. I appreciate it. Thank you and good morning to everyone listening in throughout the public and to the board and to the general manager and staff. We had a meeting as the Transit Equity Advisory Committee last week on June 16th, and several items were discussed. And again, we had great participation on the side of the attendance from our member organizations. And we did have a chance to talk first and foremost about bylaws. There's been an effort within TIAC to really focus on how to increase the value and the benefit that we derive from having such a great collection of member organizations that represent the community at the table where we can talk about things like policing, budgets, and other issues. So we spoke about bylaws and trying to clarify the distinction between a member organization and the individual representatives that are going to sit at TIAC to represent those organizations. We're looking at clarifying what the terms are, the term limits, as well as the expectations of individual representatives, again, so that we have, I think, a strengthening and ever strengthening relationship with the organizations that are at the table, many of whom we've had the benefit of hearing from today in the public forum. So in this last week's meeting, in addition to discussing the general bylaws a little bit, as we dig into that further, we did get into some actual business of the agency. We spoke about the budget forums that were occurring throughout June, provided some updates on those budget forums, the listening sessions that were referred to, and I think that the comments we heard today are good examples of ways in which we could dig deeper into how to make those listening sessions better, for example. We also spoke about T2020's Youth Pass. There was an update to the group on the Metro Bond measure and how the Youth Pass component is structured as it currently stands. So there was some discussion about the level of funding, how that funding will be utilized by youth throughout the system, and the concept of the phasing approach that I'm not sure if you've become familiar with, but the phasing was also discussed with the TIAC member organizations. We also brought an update on the equity lens work that TriMet is working on as an agency. So the language behind the equity lens was presented, and there was some discussion about how that equity lens would play out, how it would be implemented throughout the agency. So I look forward to hearing more meaningful feedback on that, as well as policing. That's a topic that was brought, of course, in the meeting in light of the recent discussions happening nationwide, but especially here in the community. Excuse me. The department gave an update on the transit police system contract, and there was a presentation and a quick overview on the status of the agreement as it currently stands. So there was some discussion again about that, and those were the topics that were discussed in this last meeting. And in closing, I just want to point out the opportunities we have moving forward. We receive a lot of feedback by email as board members. I'd like to acknowledge that as a native Spanish speaker, I'd like to invite anyone out there and go on record to feel free to write in Spanish if they would like to bring direct feedback and are struggling to find other mechanisms to do so. I'd be happy to do that, and I'll say it en español. Si gustan, por favor, escríbanme en español como un dirigente de la mesa directiva. Yo recibo esos mensajes con todo gusto. Go back to English, but I just wanted to point that out, and I think these are ways in which we could do a better job of making what we can make accessible to the public available. And I think there's no reason on earth anyone who speak Spanish or any other tongue that the board members speak should feel free to write emails in that language. I appreciate the feedback, and that concludes the TIAC report.
Thank you very much, Director Gonzalez. Is there any questions or comments for Director Gonzalez? I see no hands raised. Am I missing anybody? All right, thank you for the good report. I want to thank you for your efforts to help with the bylaws and actually clarify how organizations and individuals' actions and how they work together to make that committee as effective as possible are being done. So again, thanks for your efforts on that. It's really appreciated.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. With that, I'm going to move into the general manager's report. Mr. Kelsey.
Yes, thank you. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for all the comments from the public this morning, and as well as the updates from the other board members. Just a couple of comments. Just a reminder on the equity lens. We'll actually be talking about that a bit with John Gardner, I think, a little bit later. So stay tuned for that. There's been a lot of work done on that. Of course, a lot more to come. So it's just bridging from what Director Gonzalez was mentioning on the TIAC update. So to cover three key points today, or key topics. The first one, to me, and the most important one of the moment is, or as Tristan said from Bus Riders Union, wow, we really live in a different time, and it's really fast, not only for the community, it's fast for us as well. So I really would like to speak about the transit police and reallocations and a bit of information around the process that comes with that, that's going to be coming out very shortly. Secondly, I do want to not also forget the importance of COVID and some steps that are underway there. And finally, I'm going to give a brief update on ridership. I think most people know where that sits, but I do want to, as part of each of these updates, want to commit to giving an update on that. So firstly, I do want to take a moment and talk about the decision to reallocate some funding for our transit police division. And it is showing up later as the specific part of the $1.6 billion budget resolution, but I want to pull this out now and just kind of set the frame here. I think a few points I would make here. First, I think most people know this, but some people are maybe listening at home that haven't captured this. This agency, we really do want to acknowledge what's happening in the community in light of the senseless acts from George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Adriana of Jefferson, Ahmaud Arbery, and now Rayshard Brooks. This tragic and sad list goes on, and it has to stop. And we want to be part of the solution as it relates to specifics in this community as well. We know these injustices against the African-American neighbors and our community members and family and friends has gone on far too long in a country this great, and it should never have happened. So I know there is systemic racism here, and the raw emotion, the heartbreak, the pain that's gone on. I know personally, even when I did a town hall on racism just last week with Pastor Edie Mondane and Senator Margaret Carter, it was really well received internally, and I know I'm in turmoil personally as well on some of this. So I'm working through this and want to be part of the contributing to the solution of a needed positive future. So I don't think anyone escapes this. So, and I know I don't. We also hear the call from the communities to stop the racial injustice. In some cases, we're talking about policing here around changes needed in policing. There's clearly a spectrum of viewpoints as President Warner has indicated through, and we heard today, to no policing through to keep the policing, more policing. So there is a wide spectrum of viewpoints here. TriMet last week, we announced an agency plan to reallocate $1.8 million in this coming fiscal year's budget from transit police and whatever sources are needed otherwise, and invest those funds, and particularly initially in non-policing based community services that preserve the broader public safety. If we go back to our vision, mission, and values as an agency, in our mission, it clearly articulates that we need to be welcoming for all. And policing and safety and security is an underpinning of how we create that environment to be welcome for any all. So this is an important time, and as part of these funds, we're going to engage very quickly to do community outreach. We're going to start research. This is all going to happen over the next 90 days. Let's call it by the end of September, or essentially at July now. And this will bring that information back to the board. So we're going to do formal research. We're going to have extensive outreach, probably more so than many other times we've done before. And I've asked John Gardner to lead this for this organization right now, and also for us to listen to the wide spectrum and get a widest spectrum of perspectives as we possibly can, from churches to geographically to all different communities and interests. Some we heard from today. I think this is a really important time for us to reimagine what public safety could look like on a regional transit system. And so time is of the essence, not only because it's a conversation that's needed, not just because it's the budget here today, but also, we've heard from the city of Portland, they have reduced their budget by about a policing budget by just about 6%, 6.1%. Our 1.8%, they've got a $245 million budget. We're reducing ours by greater than that 6%, 1.8 million over our 16.2 million specifically in the policing area. So we want to reallocate. We're going to put somewhere approximately $750,000 into this whole research piece. We're going to put together a bit of a blue ribbon committee to some experts with a spectrum of advice and insights locally, and maybe some people even nationally, to help advise, guide, give their perspectives as we formulate new ways to look at things, including maybe pilot projects, things of that nature. I still believe personally there is a need for policing on the system. We all have experience in our own life. Me too. I have witnessed many occasions through my transit life, not just here, but in other places, where people do, in fact, only a transit officer can respond who has the authority of the law. But that's sure far from everything as a police officer responding. I very much have, I think there's a tremendous opportunity instinctively, but we want to listen to the public around homelessness, mental wellness. I think there's opportunities in there that doesn't have to be a police officer. Personally, I think in some regards, we've asked too much of our police officers to do so many things out there. When in doubt, just give it to a police officer. So I think this is a moment that is a real opportunity for us to recalibrate, reallocate, and to get the right response types for the right circumstances, knowing in essence we're pretty well close to a 24/7 service, and we carry the equivalent of a large city every single day in a pre-COVID environment, about 300,000 people. And we're a reflection of of this wonderful society here. So I think there is a real opportunity through our research. We're also going to get into some deep dive analysis, and we're going to look at other models. What are other people doing across the country that may be on the forefront as well for us to consider? So what we do need, the underpinning is research and wide spectrum of viewpoints across this really important region. So this is all going to happen, I'd say, in a complex environment over the next 90 days, which we will then bring this back to the board with the findings, the viewpoints, and ultimately a discussion on a recommendation as a way to proceed. So again, the underpinning for us is we need to be welcoming for all, which is part of our vision, mission, and values, and we're committed to that. But with that, we'll be ensuring we've got a process of engagement. And I sure did take to heart, I think it was Kim Marks who was speaking from the Rosewood Initiative. If there's something we have to look at around WebEx, I know it's an international Cisco product, it's used all over the world, but if there's things we have to do to refine that, I've jotted that down, Kim, if you're listening, that we want to, as an instrument, that we may have to look at other ways to do things too. So this is just the start, but I do believe, as the general manager here, I want, because there's a lot of human resources involved in things and contracts, I really want to take a short, medium, and careful considered long-term approach, particularly where there's personnel, contract, or otherwise involved. There's a lot of complexities. The ship just doesn't move on a dime. So we want to make sure that whatever those adjustments should be and would be, that we manage that in a way that ensures safety and security for everybody, even during any transition conversation. I think we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to the community to take these steps. And I know this will be part of, this is about 1%, the policing conversation, $16 million on a $1.6 billion budget. But it's part of a really important conversation, I believe, for the region. So receptive to reprogramming funds and services to other community-based approaches, including things like in Eugene, Cahoots. It's an outreach model with paramedics and others. So we need to look at those kind of models and factor those in as to the best way to proceed. It's ultimately not serving ourselves, it's ultimately serving the whole broad community that we're responsible to, including tourism. As a long-term instrument in investment of multi-billion dollars in this region, we need to make sure we provide an environment where everyone wants to come, because they get to choose too, for many people, whether they're going to get out of their car, whether they're going to choose from the airport an Uber, a Lyft, or transit, cycling, walking. So even though we're in a economic challenging period right now, I think we can make adjustments in a relatively reasonable period, but we do need to think about the long term around the overall public confidence that public transportation, not just security wise, but even health wise, that we are a serious alternative, that people feel comfortable to use us, not only for policing, but that we're clean and we're health, particularly in a COVID environment. So I'm going to stop here. I don't know if there's any questions board members may have that, about some of the steps over the next 90 days, but happy to answer them now, President Warner. If not, I'll move on to the next section, or they may come up in the budget themselves.
Yeah, I suspect there are questions. Yeah, I see Director Gonzalez. Do you want to ask your questions or make comments?
Thank you. I found that little hand button right away this time. Thank you. Thank you for the overview, Manager Kelsey. I have a question about the Blue Ribbon Committee work. I mean, I really appreciate you saying you are receptive, demonstrating the agility to reallocate, and saying you're receptive to exploring that further. I really appreciate you bringing up the Cahoots program in Eugene. I think it's a model really worth investigating how it could apply in our region. But I wanted to ask about the Blue Ribbon Committee. I think that's a really interesting next step. It sounds like something that is closer to becoming tangible. You said that you had the potential to get minds here that might be broader than just our region. What is it? Could you say what you're looking for from that Blue Ribbon Committee, or what sort of perspectives are you really hoping to bring together in that committee?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some of this is so fresh. We're still working through that, Director Gonzalez. But I think we want to get other perspectives nationally who've also been in perhaps public transportation. I'm going to give an example that someone comes to mind. Let's not say this is the right person. This board has had experience with Dr. Bev Scott, who helped us on our whole diversity and equity side as an internal review. There's an example of someone, a person who's been the CEO of in Atlanta and Boston. I think it may be in Sacramento as well. Really understands the people side of professional human resources at our core, and so that may be one type of person. But I think part of it would be a spectrum of perspectives as well. And we don't fully have that defined yet, but that would be one example that I think has actually brought all of us great advice and did some great work for us just on the whole review we did a couple of years ago now. But
Thank you.
welcome to thoughts on that one.
I thank you. I think this is a perfect subject for a little bit of discussion. Maybe give the board and folks a chance to think about this one. I think having the right brain trust collective in this conversation is going to be key. We are trying to do something we haven't necessarily done. So having the broad perspective, having the lived experience perspective that's coming from the vantage points of the drivers, of the riders, of the operators, of the folks that would have essentially be asked to respond to this variety of situations that can occur. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I think if I may, just part of when I use the word research, part of this would be formal research, and also, and you touched on this, and I apologize, I should have caught this when I was speaking. Is we also want to hear from our frontline staff as well, whether it be our fare inspectors, our frontline bus operators, our rail operators, and others. We actually want to talk to police as well. We want to talk to community members, elected officials, others. We really want to get a very robust set of viewpoints and angles on this multi-jurisdictional region that we have a responsible for getting people through, to ultimately give them the underpinnings and confidence to want to use the system for everybody. So I really see a robust communication process, but for sure our frontline staff have to be part of that, and you raised that, so thank you.
Thank you.
Director Edwards, I see your hand is up.
There we go. Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you, General Manager Kelsey. I think that was a very good report, and I certainly appreciate your efforts. I know this is something that can't be resolved overnight, and it's going to take a lot of work, and everybody's going to have their hands on the wheel, if you will, to help make this happen and to make some real changes that we need throughout TriMet and our community and at large. I really appreciate the idea that we're going to have a blue ribbon committee that's going to be able to come back with some recommendations. I would hope that committee, that's going to be a challenge in and of itself, because if it's too big, then it makes it cumbersome. But I would certainly hope that that we have to move in an expeditious manner, not in an irresponsible manner, but expeditious, because there's so many things that have to be covered regarding implicit bias, diversity, inclusion, racial justice, gender bias. All of these things need to be encompassed and discussed and worked on in order to make these changes. These are not things that have happened at TriMet overnight. These are things that have been in this society and in this country for over 400 years now. And so we've got a lot to tackle in a short period of time, because the communities that are being most impacted by the racial injustice and gender bias as well, they don't have the patience to continue to have to be subjected to the racial injustice that's been going on in this country for so long. And I would hope that that we could send out a communication to all the public and employees as well. The fact that any departure from TriMet's values and principles would be met with strong and strict discipline. And the reason I say that is because, as we all know, that we've had those communities of color that have had to endure this, whether it's in education, whether it's in government, whether it's in transportation, whether it's in employment, have had to endure these atrocities forever. And I know that forever is a long time, but for me, 71 years is forever. And so I say that to say that there are things that I believe that we can do immediately that will certainly help reduce the issues that are that are coming up now, and certainly keep them out of at least keep them out of the workplace, and that's where TriMet comes in. So I think that's, to me, I would like to see that happen yesterday. And I know there's been communications out, but I think there needs to be something very strong that makes it known to each and every person that either uses TriMet or works for TriMet, that there is no tolerance for racial injustice. There's no tolerance for microaggressions. And some folks may not understand what microaggressions are, but they will when they certainly commit those atrocities toward individuals. So, like I say, I believe that needs to happen sooner than later, and I would hope that the other board members would certainly be in lockstep with that.
Thank you.
I'm looking to see Director Bauman, you have your hand up. Director Bauman, are you there?
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you. I unmuted myself. Yeah, I just wanted to briefly say I also support the idea of a really robust and prompt public discussion about improving public safety on the system. It's so important for us to do that right now. And so I appreciate Doug's proposal to have this conversation. I wanted to mention two things. One is that this past Sunday, the New York Times Sunday magazine had what I thought was a really good roundtable on policing issues with several different national experts, and I learned a lot from it, and I would direct folks to that if you want to start thinking about these issues. I also have heard some a podcast that had a University of Chicago Law School professor named John Rappaport who studies police issues, and I found him really interesting to listen to. So there's an idea for a sort of a national expert that you might confer with.
Okay, thank you.
That's it.
Thank you very much. I don't see other hands up right now. I just wanted to comment, Doug, and for the board too. I'm pretty excited about this opportunity in time. We have an ability to actually do some really change. We have, as I said, reimagine, and I think you use that word, what our safety and security programs can be. And I want anybody looking at this to understand our budget is a pot of money that we use for safety and security. And if we can figure out a better way to expend those dollars over the next few months that make a lot of sense, this board and we want to make those changes and make them as quickly as possible. But we want them, I think, as Keith said, we want them to be expeditious, but we also want them to be the right changes. So what you're proposing is exactly right. And the other thing I would submit to you is I've had a lot of discussions with folks about safety and security, and it's clear to me that folks really do not understand the safety and security programs that TriMet has. When I hear comments like we heard from a number of speakers today that we ought to decriminalize, fare evasion, that was, what did we do that 3 years ago? And so that and again, how the transit police are being used. I don't think they've been doing actual fare enforcement for well over a year. And so I think there's some things that whatever we get into this discussion, I think just having everybody understand the system that we have out there as a baseline is really important, because I think there's just a lack of understanding about the transit police versus the other things that we do, which are not using armed officers out there.
I think that's a great comment. I mean, the agency, prior to my role here as the general manager, has been taking steps in its evolution. It needs to be willing to take more steps and faster. And I think that's what part of this compression is going on in society, locally and nationally right now. So we need to take advantage of that to find out what other changes need to happen, in my mind, and making sure we have the right tools as a carpenter in our toolbox to respond to everything. Not everything is a police officer. It shouldn't be. Then it means we're failing. But we have other things we have done. And I think the educational piece, as President Warren, as you just outlined, is part of it. So what is our base case today? Good, bad, and wrong. And I think understanding that to create a place, what is possible we can get to, and what is a reasonable transitionary period to get to some of those adaptations, I think is going to be part of that. And which things can we change and quick? And I think it's some of the Director Edwards' comments that he had made as well. So there's an amazing bucket of complexity here, but we're jumping in and we're going. I don't have a prescribed outcome, and I think that'd be wrong even if we did. But there's an immense amount of work to do in, frankly, a very short period of time on a very complex subject. So thank you for your comments and thank you for your support, and stay tuned. There's going to be a chance for everybody to weigh in this really important region and really important time. So,
good. Director Way, I see your hand still up. Did you have another comment?
I did, yes. I definitely wanted to contribute to this discussion, and I know that we'll be talking a little bit more at the budget, in the budget agenda. You know, I've been kind of rereading our board statement that we sent out on June 8th, and it's titled, you know, Raising Our Voices Against Hate, Discrimination, and Systemic Racism. And I'm sort of bothered by the fact that we are going to continue to engage in dialogue and research, again, with the very systems that have actually created systemic racism, you know, like the police force, like law enforcement. If we were really serious about exploring, you know, how to undo systemic racism, I would say that our focus and our attention for the outreach and for the committee and the voices that we want to bring is not so much as that of law enforcement, although they provide, you know, one perspective, but it's actually the people who have been disproportionately impacted, the Black and brown youth who have been who've been calling for action, many of the Black-led organizations and community leaders that are really rising up to say, we have been researched for several hundred years and we're done being researched, right? You can't research racism. You can't continue to research racism and people's experience, because people's experience is their stories, and it's how they're being treated and seen in the world. So, you know, I understand there's some steps and there's things that our agency doing, which again, I'm very thankful that we're taking steps, but I don't want us to be at a comfortable place. I want to be uncomfortable, quite frankly. I want to be moved. I don't want to see the same regular people that we have been inviting over and over again, years and years, to get their feedback, to get their solicitation, because I don't think that's actually going to change things. I don't think that's actually going to make people feel uncomfortable with the decisions that we have to make as a board. So I felt like I just needed to say that, because this is a heavy topic, and we need leaders right now who are going to challenge these very systems that have policed Black people in the history of our country for 400 years, as well as other people of color. So, you know, if we're gonna, again, if we're really serious about undoing systemic racism, I cannot emphasize the fact that it cannot be the same faces, it cannot be the same institutions that have caused systemic racism. It needs to be new organizations, it needs to be new voices, and lastly, it's got to be young people. It's got to be young people who have energetic ideas because they have grown up in a racist, you know, state. They have grown up and have seen their peers of color, you know, their you know, immigrant and refugee families being harmed and being attacked by white supremacists, like we have seen in our system 2 years ago. So it needs to be centered around those voices that are the most marginalized, that we haven't really given a lot of time for them to share their stories. You know, and last but not least, the letters that we've received today are actually from those voices. We keep saying, we're going to listen, we're going to listen, we're going to have more time to listen. And it's like, people are done talking. They want action. You know, I don't know how many more letters and how many more listening circles we can hold, quite frankly, because people are kind of done talking and they want us to act. And last but not least, you know, I'll say that police brutality has been going on since the inception of the founding of this nation, of hurting Indigenous lives, right? Black and brown lives. And it's not only now in the last couple of years that we have social media to document that. So the outrage that, you know, we've seen amongst those communities of color have been ongoing for generations. Systemic racism has been happening in our country for generations, and again, since the inception of the founding, you know, the founding fathers. And so I just really want us to be careful in terms of how we're navigating this conversation. I think as a board member, and I will speak for myself personally, I expect us to have, you know, at the very minimum, a website with more information and with robust communication in terms of how the public can really engage in these 90 days of active discussions. I would again like to see not the usual players, you know, in the same room, but a representation of folks who have been marginalized, who have bold ideas for us, because we cannot carry the same thing that we've been doing for many years if we don't provide folks with an opportunity to come up with their bold ideas and to challenge us as a board. So those are just my thoughts.
Good comments, Director Way.
Yeah,
good comments.
And to be continued, but I just wanted to share some thoughts.
Yep. Director Edwards, I think that spurred some thoughts from you.
Yes, thank you, President Warner. I certainly echo Director Way's remarks, and I would hope that when this Blue Ribbon Committee comes together, that I would be consulted, simply because I want to make sure that some of my constituents are representative on that Blue Ribbon Committee. And as Director Wade said, that, you know, it has to be youth. And one of my favorite quotes from Dr. King is, it's not where, and I'm going to, you know, change a little, make it a little bit more politically correct, but it's not where a person stands during convenience and comfort. It's where a person stands in times of conflict and confusion, not confusion, but conflict and inconvenience. And the thing is about that statement, and when I read that, it charged me to always challenge folks. And I realized what Dr. King was saying is that when folks are comfortable, nothing is going to change. And so folks have to be made to feel uncomfortable. And I dedicated my my work in making people uncomfortable so that there can be change. It just goes without saying that if everyone is comfortable, nothing is going to change, and that is true. Ben Franklin said that as well years ago. He said it's not going to be changed by the folks that that are being impacted by this negative behavior. It's going to be changed by those folks that are not impacted, and that's certainly true today. That's why this movement is become so forceful, because now we have the majority population and young people that are involved in this and committed to it. TriMet is a microcosm, and my, you know, I've always thought of being on this board when selected by the governor to be appointed to this board, that there was an opportunity to show the rest of society what society should look like. And that's been, you know, that's been what I've been charged with. Not that TriMet was so bad when I came on board. Certainly, there's a lot of work that was done before I got here, but at the same time, we still have a lot of work to do. This is a 400 and some year old problem that we've had in this country, and we have to try to do what we can to eliminate racism and eliminate gender bias. All those things need to be worked on, and it's not going to be easy, and some heads are going to have to roll, and we're going to have to, some folks are going to lose their jobs, and some folks are going to have to recognize that that's where we are today, because the young people, and they say it very well. I was there myself years ago, that they're not taking it anymore. They want change, and they want change now. Some of that is impatience, but at the same time, they know that their ancestors and their ancestors and their ancestors have had to endure these same challenges throughout their lives, and they're not going to have their successors have to deal with these same issues that we're dealing with today. We're going to stop kicking the can down the road, and the only way to do that is to have those folks at the table in that Blue Ribbon Committee that are going to make us all uncomfortable with some of the things they might say or some of the challenges they might present to us. But that's the only way that we're going to make progress. And this is a golden opportunity to make progress, and we have to look at it through those eyes. And the only way that we're going to make those changes and is have folks that are going to be sitting at that table that look at things differently. They look at things with new eyes and new ideas. And a lot of times we say, well, that we can't do that. And I say, well, that's the problem. It's not that you can, it's that you won't. And so we have to have that, change our mindset, that we're not going to say can't anymore. We're going to say, how do we make this work? How do we make this happen? How do we make these changes? How do we eliminate racism? How do we eliminate gender bias? How do we eliminate implicit bias? How do we embrace diversity and inclusion and racial justice? That's what we have to do, and that we have to think differently in that. And for me, like I say, I can't think like a 30-year-old or a 35-year-old or a 40-year-old. They think differently than I do, and I recognize that. But I also think that that's an asset, and we have to take advantage of all those assets so that we can make change, because we haven't done our jobs, to be quite honest. Otherwise, we would have different discussions today. We'd have different work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Edwards. Director Gonzalez, did I see you raise your hand?
Yeah, just a quick clarification. On the heels of this fantastic discussion, I wanted to emphasize a point I made about what I'm looking for on the Blue Ribbon Committee. When I say lived experience and ensuring we have those that would be responding, I want to emphasize that I echo the sentiments just shared by Director Y and Director Edwards around the need for those new voices and the importance of having voices that we have not had a chance to hear from to be able to drive the conversation. And I think we need the fresh perspective. So when I say the lived experience, I'm referring to the broader diversity of perspectives that could confront the fact that when we go through this and get it right, it's on all of us to answer the question about how we overcome racism and how we create an inclusive, equitable society and transit agency, frankly. The answer to that question is on all of us to answer. And the folks I would like to see ensure are at the table are those that will be entrusted ultimately to be a part of that solution. So whatever we call the responders to something that might happen in the system. Today we've heard there was a riot on the system. There was sexual harassment that was addressed by somebody as a responder. We've heard of other circumstances where people had to respond to something on the system. Whatever we call those responders, those are the folks, their skill sets, their perspectives are really important to have at the table. Whether it's a mental health professional, a a rider advocate, whatever the label is we put on it. I think making sure that we're hearing from the people that are ultimately going to answer that phone call and be asked to walk into that situation, whatever it may be, that we're hearing from what is it they need to walk in there and be their best self. And that's where I say, I I have to honor that we're trying to create a system that also has safety, security, and even for a tourist from somewhere around another country that doesn't understand the U.S., we still want them to feel safe and like they have a way to use the system in a good received way. Those are the things that I think we need to look at when we're bringing a committee together to try to create the safety aspects of the system. I think health and safety are principal. I don't know what the tool is that creates the health and safety. I don't know what the label is for that, but I know that I would like those people to be at the table to have an opportunity to say, well, these are the tools, this is the training, these are the quals, this is what I need in order to do my best job of bringing health and safety. Um, that's what is most important to me. And ideally, those those voices are that are invited to have that conversation are new voices from underrepresented parts of our community, because we do need to have, whether we're calling it police or anything else, we need to have Black men and women that are part of that response system if we ever expect Black men and women to be served by that response system. And so that's one of the things that I think needs to be critical, no matter what title we put on it. And that's what is important and I want to look for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Wade, we have another comment you wanted to make? Okay. So Doug, I think this conversation was probably a little longer than we thought it would be, but this is exactly the conversation we needed to have. And
well, yeah, this is great. This is exactly why I wanted to start off with this. If as part of the feedback today has been very helpful, so thank you, and for this very important discussion. This is not a one and done. There's going to be a lot more of this to come ahead. As part of the general manager's update, I'm going to take a risk here and move to something way more tame called the COVID update. That still does exist too. And I'll be brief, knowing the time we've taken, which I think was really important time, frankly. I think I'm just going to pass on a couple comments here in my notes, and I'm just going to move on. We are still on COVID, if I may. We are still waiting for the bus barriers. They were supposed to have been here June 16th. They're several weeks late arriving, so I wanted the board to know that. But as soon as they arrive, we got the teams all ready for the installs. We've already been we've hired the initial 30 cleaners. They're out on the system now. We have got the next 20 on top of it. So very shortly, over the next number of weeks, we anticipate having about 160 extra cleaners on the system, the 30 plus the 130 with their supervisors. So we need this in place to be able to get to the 3-foot distancing. I think that's very important, so we don't ask people to start moving from 6-foot to 3-foot distancing, and yet we haven't got the underpinnings of the standards in place yet. So I'm the one probably holding that back until we get the standards in place that takes care of the public can trust us. I think first impressions to me are lasting, so we want to get that right. We are also piloting some new technology. We're getting some interesting early results on UV technology. The lamps, part of our clean effort. In fact, I just saw this morning, New York Transit and their MTA is just actually going to be converting its rail fleet over time using a UV technology. So we're going to have to look into that a little bit. New Jersey Transit's doing the same. So I think we're all kind of on the UV side of what does this really mean, still exploring how much the exposure, how long, etc. So I'll let folks know that not only we're managing today's issues on COVID, we're also dealing with what opportunities exist that help us be better and in a cost-effective way. So I want also there's an immense amount of work that's going on, and I really do want to thank our staff our frontline staff. We've all done it. But I also want to thank the behind the scenes staff because they've been working tirelessly for months. And frankly, if anything, the agency is strained, and many of the people working behind the scenes to support our frontline staff, we've got to watch burnout here. I'm really conscious of that on some of our key leaders. So I just want to let you know that how hard people have been working on everybody's behalf here. So I'll probably stop there on COVID. And the final item is just on the ridership. For the month of May, we did about 2.7 million trips. The weekday system's down roughly about 68%. So I think to one of the earlier comments, there's more people are starting to move around on the system. We're getting ready for Multnomah County and others to move to the phase 1 and 2 steps. We are looking at what our bus response scenarios might look like in terms of being able to start to scale back up a little bit. But we definitely need the bus barriers in place to get to that 3 foot to be able to handle the capacities. But there is an intersection between COVID and the ridership piece. So I think, as we can probably see just by the general traffic being out there, there's a little more on the streets today. And so I'm optimistic that we're going to start to see some upticks here as well. So so between the economy, COVID, protests, riots, policing, critical policing issues, I really want to thank all our staff because this is quite an omnibus of issues for this agency, and it's only through our team that we're able to respond to each one's deserved complexity and attention. So that would be my report, Mr. Board President.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for the general manager? All right, seeing none, we're going to move into our regular action items agenda. But first is the consent agenda. And usually we have a number of items on the consent agenda. But today we only have one, and that's approval of the board minutes for May 27th, 2020. I hope the board has had an opportunity to review those. And if so, if you're comfortable with those, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda with the minutes as presented?
Mr. Chairman, can I just interrupt for a moment? I did look at the board minutes, okay, and I know that I was the one that made the motion to approve the the budget, but at the same time I had a concern about reporting. I'm sorry, not the budget, but the reporting back, and it talked about semi-annual, and we had a discussion about having shorter intervals, quarterly reports. And I know that wasn't included. There was no amendment to that motion, but at the same time, I just wanted that noted in the minutes that we had that discussion because I think it's going to come back to bite us down the road.
Okay, I'm sorry, so tell me exactly where that is, so maybe the staff got that. That was that was on the transit-oriented development, or was that on our budget?
It was on the TOD.
On TOD, okay, all right. So I think those changes, so what you want to do is add language that talks about maybe more regular updates, even quarterly.
Yes.
That's okay. I do remember that discussion, so that seems like something we should add. I agree.
Okay. Thank you.
So with those amendments, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda with the changes to the minutes as noted?
So moved with the amendments.
And that's Second. Made the motion. Who seconded?
Keith.
Keith. Okay, perfect. Any further discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, then I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion to approve the consent agenda with the amendments to the minutes that we discussed, please signify by saying aye.
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 Is there any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion is approved unanimously. All right, let's move on then to our resolutions, of which we have 5 of them. The first resolution is resolution 20-06-24, which is adopting the Coordinated Transportation Plan, CTP, for seniors and/or persons with disabilities as recommended by the Special Transportation Fund Advisory Committee. And before I ask you for the staff report, I just noted that when I went through the agenda item and the board shared documents, the entire 300+ page report wasn't included in the agenda item, but was included in the materials, total board materials next to almost to the bottom of that, if people want to find that that report if you didn't already. So with that, Mr. General Manager, you have some comments and thoughts on this one?
Yes. So thank you, Mr. Board President, members of the board. This resolution, as you've indicated, this is the state designated Special Transportation Fund Agency. So as such, the agency has a federal obligation to develop a plan that addresses the full range of transportation services for seniors and people with disabilities across this whole Tri-County district. Our responsibility here is to take applications from the transportation providers and review them, evaluate them, and then develop a disbursement plan under the advisement of this Special Transportation Formula Advisory Committee. We also have a role to act as a pass-through for STF funds, which mostly go through other government and nonprofit service providers through the region. So included in those are TriMet's own LIFT program, Wilsonville Smart, Ride Connection, and a number of small city transit agencies and community organizations. The funds go to services that would otherwise be met by LIFT paratransit. Now, we at TriMet, we work to recruit members to the SDF Advisory Committee that also reflect the diversity of the communities we serve. So I wanted everyone to know that. The efforts provide for a substantial improvement in transportation services for seniors and people with disabilities, and your approval here is recommended. And don't know if, Tom, is there anything that you want to add here? I know, for example, Ride Connection was actually commented on earlier in the public testimony, and I don't know if you wanted to comment on that as it relates to some of this conversation to start with.
Thank you, Doug. And thank you for your summary of the resolution. I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think it summarized everything about the plan itself. The Coordinated Transportation Plan does fulfill the planning requirements of the state's STF, Special Transportation Funds administrative rules, and including federal requirements for Coordinated Transportation or Human Services Transportation Plan, as called out in the FAST Act, which I believe has since been replaced, but over the years, but those requirements have carried forward. Essentially, as Doug mentioned, this plan authorizes the TriMet as the regional agency, STF agency, to hold the STFAC meetings and authorize the distribution of funds. And a perfect example, as Doug was mentioning, with Ride Connection, in the budget, there is a reduction of TriMet general funds that are recommended for Ride Connection FY21. But those that gap will be can be replaced with special transportation funds. And in fact, just this week, the STFAC committee met to authorize the usage of those funds to kind of backfill the reduction in funds from TriMet. So and that's an example of how the STFAC works with TriMet in coordination to ensure that we're providing funding to other small programs and jurisdictions for senior and disabled transportation. So that concludes my comments in support of the CTP.
Doug, did you have any other comments?
No, I have none, but happy to answer any questions of the board members.
Okay. So questions, comments by the board? I see Director Bauman and Director Way and Edwards were all there. So I'm going to start with Director Bauman.
Okay, thank you. I didn't have a question. I just wanted to acknowledge this is a very complete, very thorough document, and so I want to thank everyone who contributed to it. To me, looking especially at the demographics section for those who want to dig in, information about job density, where low income and disabled people live. It's really actually a very, very interesting set of demographic information. So thank you for all that's in this very comprehensive report.
Director Edwards.
Thank you. I had a question. It's not regarding the report here, but when I was looking at the materials, there on the advisory committee, it looks like there's a vacancy for Multnomah County, and I had someone that I thought would be a great person to serve on that committee. I didn't know the process for getting a person on that committee.
Thank you. Yeah, it's actually timely that you mentioned that. As I said earlier, SDFAC met on Monday, and one of the discussion points was these vacancies. What we asked is that it turns out that each of the counties has one open position at the moment, and we asked that each staff from each county convene and come back with a nominee that we would then advance to the TriMet board to be put on the committee. But we would love to get your recommendations. I can advance that to the nominating committee in Multnomah County.
Okay, I'll certainly get that to you.
Okay, if you want to send it to me in the chat, that would be also one way to do it.
If I could figure out how to use the chat, I would. Director Way, your hand's up.
Yes, thank you, Tom, for the overview. I have been meeting with a couple of constituents in Clackamas County who were also concerned by the cuts to Ride Connection, since that is a very valuable service, as Commissioner Fisher noted earlier, to really providing transportation for some of our most vulnerable in our county. And so I'm happy to hear that it sounds like, given that we do have a reduction in our adopted budget as an agency, that it sounds like the STF funding would backfill some of that loss. Is that correct?
Yes. What's happening is, because of COVID, they have experienced a decrease in rides, which is actually saving SDF funds. And so those funds they are projecting are going to be in excess of the amount that is being reduced from TriMet's general fund. So the SDFAC has authorized for them to roll those funds over into the next year to fill that gap, assuming that those rides come back and they need to put more service out. The funds will be available. However, they will be they'll be the unused SDF funds instead of the TriMet general fund.
Got it. And then I guess my follow-up question is how do jurisdictions apply? Is there an application process for the SDF funds, or how does that work if they need the funds next year?
Well, so actually the committee authorized all SDF recipients to be allowed to use any unused funds from this year to be used next year for any gaps that they may have. So it wasn't the authorization wasn't just for Ride Connection, it was for all the SDF recipients, including jurisdictions. Okay, and then is there an application process, or is there, I'm just kind of curious as to if a provider is interested in funds, then how would they go about accessing? Yes, good question. Every 2 years, there is an application process for SDF funds. We do a kind of a notification about those. Of course, there's a lot of applicants who've been involved for many years, and so they're looking for them. But we also, put the process out or the announcement out to a wider net. And the next process will occur next fall, or this coming fall. Okay, thank you. You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments on this one? I've received a request for a break after this, so why don't we see if there's a motion to approve resolution 20-06-24 as presented.
So moved.
Second, Lori.
Okay, Lori, thank you.
Linda and Lori.
Okay, very good. All right. We have a motion on the table. Is there any further discussion on this item? Again, my comment is good piece of work, a lot of coordination, and again, we're in changing times, so thanks for the flexibility to everybody. With that, then, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of the motion to approve resolution 20-06-24, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion is approved unanimously. Thank you. What I would like to suggest is we take a 10-minute break. And I see people smiling. So let's come back at, my clock says, how about 11:15?
And
All
just a reminder, while you're on break, please mute your microphones. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go on then to resolution 20-06-25, which is authorizing a modification of an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Portland for design and construction management services for the Division Transit Project. Mr. General Manager, do you have a report on this one?
Yes, I do. And Steve Witter may have a couple additional comments to add on to anything I might miss. But this project, when the original IGA was initiated, the project was at a 60% design level. The resolution approved at that time recognized the project's advancement to 100%. And the amendment that would be required to encompass the full scope of the city's services. Some of those we may not have fully known. The resolution before you today is adding $3.2 million to the IGA, or the Intergovernmental Agreement. It's intended to cover additional city staff time, City of Portland that is, and materials for their engineering services, Portland's Water Bureau construction work, as well as startup and closeout key tasks at least. Now, this is not something we can do an RFP on. Also, only the City of Portland can perform these services. I think something that is important to note is the amount that we're recommending as an adjustment, because it's over the general manager's authority of $3.2 million. It is accommodated within the project's overall $175 million. So there's not an additional ask. It's just an approval of that amount. And the project team will manage within the 175. So your approval on this is recommended. And Steve, if I missed anything, please jump in.
Doug, I think you covered it, and big part of it is, again, Water Bureau construction, but happy to answer any questions.
Okay.
So this is Bruce. I had a question on the Water Bureau. This is to relocate some water lines, I assume, as part of the project?
That's exactly correct, Director Warner. Essentially, there's the Bull Run water supply line runs right down the middle of Division. Okay. And so we have Water Bureau out there as inspection services to make sure we don't damage that pipe. And then they're in charge of reconnections when we do utility work to all the customers along Division.
Thank you.
Yes.
Other questions by the board? Keith, do you still have your hand up on this one? Okay, I don't see any hands anymore. So any other comments? Okay, then is the board ready to make a motion to approve resolution 20-06-25?
So moved, Travis.
Travis, motion, is there a second? Okay. Any further discussion on this item? Hearing none, then call the question. All those in favor of the motion to approve resolution 20-06-25, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, then the motion is approved unanimously. Having a rough time talking today. Let's move on then to resolution 20-06-26, which is adopting the fiscal year 2021 annual budget and appropriated funds. Mr. General Manager and Dee, I think you probably are the tag team on this one.
Yes, and we'll also, Nancy Young-Oliver will also
okay
here in a little bit. So just a reminder, if I may, to set the state, under state law, TriMet must adopt a balanced budget before the start of the new fiscal year, being July 1st. Particularly with COVID, our intention was to do this in the May board session, but because of the COVID changes in the economic dynamics here, we've had to do it at this point in time with a chance to actually get ready for July 1st. So these are part of our new realities that we're all facing. So Nancy will shortly walk us through a few of the other adjustments that have been also reviewed with the Finance and Audit Committee. A few weeks ago also, though, we did participate in a series of public town halls. There were 3 of them per se, plus the TFCC hearing the prior month, which also had a public component to it, which there were people who did provide comment to that. So at those town halls, and for the board members who did attend, and I do want to thank you for freeing up your time to participate in those, we did review our financial outlook for 21 at those, the key elements that is, and answer any questions. In fact, I think in all sessions, we waited till all questions were responded to. So part of it was also included our plan for restoring service to pre-pandemic levels, or our guess as to when they think they're going to be required, because it's demand-based. Again, we would be continuing with equity initiatives such as low-income fare, our approach to system safety with sustained and elevated cleaning measures, and the increased costs that Nancy will highlight here in just a few moments. Despite the challenges that we're facing and the opportunities presented by COVID, we are also remaining committed in this budget before you today for approval that there would be no fare increase in this next fiscal 21 period. It is also, we felt, is important to advance the capital projects, the important capital projects, construction of Division Transit Project, which goes back to the just prior resolution was approved for an adaptation. The Better Red Project, literally the President of the United States tweeted about awarding to TriMet $99.9 million to extend it, to improve our reliability, to double track out to the airport, get out to Fairplex as well on the west side, and also continue our really critical planning for the Southwest Corridor. All of these at a time, an economic time, we realize that we're also a contributor to creating a lot of really important jobs during these challenging times. So those are included in the budget, manage the immediate, the middle, and the short term. And there are also quite a number of state of good repair projects, and including a major project on the Steel Bridge that's about $20 million, which will shut the lower rail portion of the bridge down for the whole month of August. So a very significant project for us that's been in the works for probably a year and a half. And finally, the item I made mention and we spent great time talking about is at the front end of my general manager's report about the reprogramming of funds. The intention is to keep those funds, but once we have and the city of Portland is committed to the end of December, their contributions as part of it. So we've got a half year of the existing agreements to play through, and then hopefully we can get us all the work done to the public consultation and outreach on reimagining the balance and spectrum of ensuring a safe and secure system. So that is included in there, keeping the funds intact. We did reduce, as part of that $1.8 million, there are 6 positions we would drop down the ceiling on and not look to hire or replace those fundamentally. So a reduction in actual police on the system. Again, the actions do not decrease the overall safety security budget for now, but can be moved around in that bucket or basket of funding as the year unfolds. And again, finally, I will conclude by really thanking Dee and Nancy, Kara Fitzpatrick, Michael Doan, Allison Langford, and many other people, Brett Rogers, across our organization, who've done, on top of their daily work, yeoman service to help us pull this off in such a complex and fast-moving time. So with that, I'm now going to turn it over to Dee. Any comments you want to have? And I know that Nancy will just walk through the summation. And then to questions.
Thank you, Doug. So just to sum up, I just want to cover the overall big picture that the budget is a $1.64 billion budget. The day-to-day operating expenses will be, or operating budget is $732.8 million. Capital and operating projects are $377.8. Other non-operating capital requirements are 18.7 million. Contingency is set at 39.6, and our fund balance, restricted and unrestricted, are 471.3. So for a total of $1.64 billion. So less than we had expected, but still a good strong number. Now I'm going to turn it over to Nancy Young Oliver to go through the exact changes between the approved budget. It was approved on March 25th, and now we're proposing proposed budget for adoption. Nancy?
Great, thank you, Dean. So still good morning, everyone. From the approved budget that you looked at in March until now, the document that you would be adopting, there has been numerous changes. The overall change is 71.5 million. I don't want to walk you through what those changes entail. In the resources section of the budget, the changes have to do first in the area of fund balance. The fund balance, the restricted and unrestricted fund balance has increased due to some changes that we have made in our capital program, specifically deferring or changing the scope on certain projects. We have also have a significant loss of revenues. There's a decrease in transit advertising of 4.9 million, or decrease in the employer payroll taxes of 66.7 million. Self-employment tax down almost 1 million, decrease in passenger revenues of 51.7 million. The increases in our resources has to do with the CARES Act funding and some other federal, state, and local funding for a total of 126 million in FY21. We've also had some increases in our CIP resources due to the deferral of those projects that I mentioned earlier. So
Nancy?
Yes.
Excuse me, this is Director Edwards. Do you have any graphics that you could to support your presentation?
So, so is the attachment to the resolution available? I believe it was provided to you in your packet.
Well, it's in our packet, but when we're on this under the WebEx, only thing I have in front of me is the agenda.
Okay.
And
if I think it's Jeffrey Carroll who's our host, if he could put up that page, is it possible to forward to that page?
Is it possible to tell me which page?
Okay, it would be with the resolution.
Nancy,
yeah,
page 265 out of 305.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. The packet I have only has 51 pages.
Okay. We just go to the resolution. It's good.
yeah, if we don't have it, let's just keep it moving. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries. It is in the packet. So that kind of gives you the summary of the changes in our resources. The changes in the requirements or the expenditure side of life. The first thing is that we had a decrease in our M&S expenditures across all divisions at over $9 million. However, we then had an increase in our staffing due to the overall cleanliness of the system and our revenue vehicles of 11.8 million. We've had a small increase in our OPEB for the most current forecast projections. We've had an increase in carryover to those capital projects that we mentioned earlier at 48.1 million. We have increased the contingency 5.8 million due to all the uncertainties heading into FY21. We had a decrease in the debt service due to the projected timing of the bond issuance that we would do in FY21. And then our overall restricted bond proceeds and unrestricted ending fund balance has increased due to those changes in the CIP projects, the capital projects that we mentioned earlier. So our resources went up by 71.5 and our expenditures have gone up by 71.5 for all the reasons that we've just discussed. Are there any questions that we can answer? So I see that there's a question regarding M&S. M&S stands for materials and supplies. It includes things that anything other than payroll.
Nancy, it's on the screen now.
Oh, good. There we go. There's the summary. Thank you. So the top part is the resources, the bottom part is the requirements or the expenditure side of life. And again, it's a $71.5 million change on both sides. We do have to adopt a balanced budget. Are there other questions? Bruce, I can see you talking, but I can't hear you.
That's because I dutifully I muted my mic. So I just wanted to ask if there were any other comments or questions by board members, and I'm not seeing any hands raised at the moment.
Oh.
And I was also wondering if you two, Dee and Nancy, were done with your presentation.
We are done with the presentation.
Okay, all right. So it's back to the board then for comments and clarifications.
Bruce, I'm
Yes.
having trouble raising my hand, but this is Linda.
We hear you and we see you.
Okay, great. Dee and Nancy, for people who aren't familiar with budgeting, I think it would be helpful for people to understand that a budget is just a roadmap. It's based on anticipated income and anticipated expenditures. Once a budget is approved during the year, there can be reallocations based on some of the anticipated revenue not being realized, and or decisions made by the board subsequent to the approval of the board, the budget, to reallocate resources within the expenditure lines. Correct?
That's right. So what we have is a spending plan, but it is a very formal spending plan in that we can receive as much revenue as people are willing to give us without having to adjust the budget, but we can only spend what's in the budget. Now, the categories such as materials and supplies, which is where a good deal of things run through in each cost center, are broad enough so that we can make changes. We can reallocate funds from time to time as needed, as directed.
Right. So I think it's important to know that it's a total budget that is based on a plan that we have today, and that there is room for flexibility if needs change or philosophies change, or now if we don't budget enough money and we take in more money, we can't spend it, right? Unless we do a budget.
However, if we want to make some changes, what we can do is bring a resolution to the board to approve a transfer from the general manager's contingency. Nancy, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you stated it very well.
Okay.
Are there questions or comments by the board?
Oh, yeah, I had my hand raised. So one quick comment in regards to, we received a question in regards to kind of our reserve. So I would ask Nancy and Dee just to kind of give just a little bit of information session on how we budget and how the reserve is really about ensuring that if we have any kind of unforeseen things that may come up, how do we utilize that reserve? Some folks mentioned rainy day fund in the public comment, but that's not essentially what our reserve is. And the current reserve that we have forecasted is in alignment with our strategic financial plan.
Yes, the term rainy day fund is one that's very common in governments, but it's not something that we use here. The unrestricted and the restricted fund balance combined make up our total. I'm going to let Nancy tell you what the different pieces of it are, but you're very right. This aligns with the board adopted strategic financial plan guidelines of between 2 and 2.5 months of operating expenditures. So I'm sorry, 2.5 weeks. No, it's months. Go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So to dive into that a little bit further, our fund balance is made up of 2 restricted ponds. One of it is bond proceeds, and as you know, bond proceeds can only be used for the acquisition or construction of a major capital asset, cannot be used for operating. We also have some funds restricted for debt payments. In other words, we have payments that are due. It may not be due in FY21. It might be due in FY22 or beyond. That's what those funds are for. Our unrestricted ending fund balance is a combination of cash, investments, accounts receivable, and other elements on the face of our financial statements. It's important to understand that that is not just physical green cash sitting in an account. Okay, it's made up of a lot of elements off of the financial statements. Fund balance is an unappropriated line item in the budget. And so when you're asking about, what flexibility do we have, that's a direct reflection of us having a contingency. And when you look at our budget, the contingency for FY21, I believe, is 39.5 million, right around there. I'm just rounding. What a contingency account is for, and it's not actually an account, it's just a line item, is for those things that are unknown and unplanned at the time that you adopt the budget. So there's, we've already incurred just in this last month the requirement to have a cleanliness on our system. That's added $11.8 million to our budget that we didn't know 2 months ago. And because we don't know what other things might be coming down the pike in FY21, you have to have that contingency available so that we can respond to the demands that are put on us. But it is not a rainy day fund. A contingency is normal, and it is in every governmental entity's budget that you would review. It doesn't matter where it's at. Everyone has a contingency fund.
And the use of a contingency fund requires board approval. So it's not something that we're just playing with.
Right.
And that's all I have to say about that.
And this is just a quick follow-up, and this is consistent with all of our prior years of the reserve, and in regards to the reserve and fund balance, this has been consistent of all of our budgeting processes. I mean, there's nothing different about this year in conjunction with the CARES Act at all. Is that correct?
It was adopted on July 1st of 2014.
Yeah, correct.
The financial guideline was adopted, I think, for one of the authors of that. So we have a 3% contingency ever since. We have slightly more this year because of the uncertainty of the fair revenue return. So, Nancy, did you have more to add?
Yeah, the one thing that I would add is that with the change to the strategic financial plans, the board approved that we could have an ending unrestricted fund balance between 2 and 2.5 months operating reserves. This is the first budget that we're presenting to you that we've really planned to have less than 2.5 months operating reserves. It should come in, if everything happens the way we are projecting right now, would come in just a little over 2.25 months of operating reserves. So this be the first time that we dipped below that 2.5. But with everything that we're facing, I believe that is understandable.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
All right, Director Ballin.
Yes, could you, Dee and Nancy, clarify again, there's extra funds that are being expended for cleaning buses and trains. Which line item did they come out of?
Yeah, so if you look in the requirements section on the screen, the second line item, we've had increased funds due to staffing increases due to the cleanliness of the system. What that represents is approximately 160 staff. That's everything that's associated with the staff. It includes their salary, their fringe benefits, their medical and dental. It includes the supplies that they need to be out on the system and doing that job. So that added 11.8 million to our budget.
And so that's looking forward, but looking for what's been spent over the past couple of months, where did that come from?
Oh, the pieces, so the cuts that we made to M&S, materials and services, for FY 2020 are reflected in our beginning fund balance for FY 2021. So that's already been taken into consideration. So if you go back up to the top and you look at the resources side and you see increase in unrestricted fund balance, as a result of projections. That's taking into account the changes and the cuts that Doug made for FY 2020, the pullback in expenditure, and then going into FY 21, we made additional cuts in our M&S over all divisions of a little over 9 million.
But also to add to that, we basically consumed our CARES Act funding in fiscal year 2020 to cover expenses such as the extraordinary expenses, as much as 500 to 600,000 a month on cleaning supplies alone, and PPE was, so that was how that was covered in case that, and that all feeds into the undistributed fund balance and into the line that on the summary that Nancy was talking about.
Great, thank you for that.
All right, I see no other hands raised. How's the board feeling about the budget? I want to just build on what Director Simmons mentioned for anybody watching this. If we go through our Blue Ribbon Committee, reimagining safety and security, we will have this budget to be able to implement that. And I expect that there will be changes in the expenditures that we make within this budget as the plan is determined. So there's lots of opportunity and lots of flexibility, and we can be very nimble. And we're looking forward to that effort to give us some real guidance on this one. Does somebody else have a comment? I walked over. Nope. Well then.
Yeah. So I think there's two of us, Bruce.
Oh, there we go. I see that this Director Way.
Sure, thank you so much. And I really appreciated the additional insight and the overview that Dr. Simmons provided earlier in regards to the budget and us, really sort of trying to adapt and be flexible and hear the voices of the community who may want us to do different things around security presence in particular. I am a little concerned. I'm looking at the actual proposed budget. It's 132, page 132 out of 344, but I was just looking at a couple of different line items around the security and emergency management department. And there are several expenses that are currently listed under there that we have currently budgeted. It's a security services, excuse me, K9 unit, anti-terrorism team, gang outreach. And so I'm just curious as to what are those related to the PBB contract, or are those additional services that we are expending through the other agreements that we have with other entities? I'm just curious as to what those three line items are specifically about. And then the second question that I had was, and I think I mentioned this last year, I had brought it up, but we have a Department of Homeland Security contract as well that we also have reinstated this year. And so if someone can tell me a little bit more about that particular contract and what is it used for, what's the purpose of us engaging in a contract like that, that would be helpful.
Nancy, do you have that detail?
So I know that the three line items, the K9 unit, the anti-terrorism, and I don't recall what the third one is, but I can see the page on my, so I know what you're talking about. Now, so that is all a part of the contract that we have had with the Portland Police Bureau that I know is changing before the end of the year or by the end of the year. So the reason why we call it out was because there was public interest in understanding how much we were spending on, gang outreach, gang enforcement, the K9 unit. The public wanted to know that information, and so we split those out on those individual line items, but they could have just as easily just been on one line item altogether. The other contract that you mentioned, I don't know if Marla is at the board meeting here would want to respond to that. I don't know if she's one of the attendees.
But Nancy, while we're waiting to see who could speak to that, I just wanted to know that if we didn't call them out, those items would have folded up into the M&S line.
Yes, they would have.
Okay. Does anyone have any input for the other items regarding Homeland Security? If not, Director Way will be happy to provide that for you separately.
Yes, thank you. I think I remember bringing it last year too, and I couldn't remember why exactly we we had that contract. And when I think of Department of Homeland Security, I think there's a lot of sometimes it could be associated with a lot of negative connotations, especially for people of color, people who are undocumented. And so I just wanted to sort of clarify what our role was, what TriMet's role would be in implementing a contract that was, with the Department of Homeland Security.
I would like to see that as well.
Sure, we can provide that for you. I think we'll get Marla to connect in with you on this. I think part of this is also part of the risk profile of transit as it relates to canine. These are not the canine portion, is my recollection, is these are for bomb related dogs, not for any other purpose. And they get shared, and they've also get used beyond transit in the city of Portland and other places as well. So we are in the process of actually moving some of that canine efforts out to other people other than ourselves.
But I would also speak to the Homeland Security line item. Those are typically grant funded, and they're primarily for infrastructure improvements related to our security system.
Yeah. We'll get Marla to get you that detail for sure.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
That might be broader interest, so you could please send it out to the board.
Director Edwards, I'm going to turn to you.
Yes, thank you. I guess my main focus on this budget is that we make sure that dollars are certainly allocated towards security, but more than just security, it's a revamping our security and rebuilding what we call security, as well as community outreach to communities of color. We had our Roads and Parks resolution earlier this year, and I just want to be clear on our mission, not only to provide a free transit day, but more of an educational opportunity to educate the community at large, our children and the adult community as well, regarding who Rosa Parks was and what that's about, not just a free transit day. And so I think that those dollars are well spent, but I think we need to look at how we spend them going forward a little differently. Maybe having those conversations with those communities so that we can make sure that our dollars are being spent in a way that that benefits them the most, not that our dollars are just being spent as a cursory to appease the community. Also, I would hope that our dollars, some of those dollars are going to be allocated as well as General Manager mentioned, in regards to our internal work that we have to do in regards to training of all employees, both labor and management employees at TriMet, in regard to diversity and implicit bias and racial injustice. That training has, we already know that those trainings exist out there, but we have to see what works best for TriMet as well. So that's my thing, and I certainly appreciate Director Simmons sharing that we do have the flexibility with the budget to be able to do what is necessary to make TriMet better.
Yeah, if I may just respond to Director Edwards, particularly on the training side. I've got our Chief Operating Officer, Sam Zasu, and team are actually looking at our whole training programs and what the strategies need to be training-wise inside TriMet now. So that will be absolutely encompassed. What programs should be modernized, changed, etc., and how delivered. So that work has been underway over last year. It'll continue this work this year because of COVID's kind of pushed it off. Unfortunately, we've lost a number of months here, but we're at the back end of getting trying to that clean. So we will have that very much included and captured to make sure we've got the resources allocated to execute that as well. So great points. Thank you.
Director Stovall.
Thank you, President Warner. This is, I appreciate this discussion around the budget. Absolutely appreciate the discussion earlier around reimagining safety and security for TriMet. First and foremost, I'm supportive of the budget. The structural concepts of what we have here are absolutely adequate. The TSCC, has rendered their opinion on kind of what we do from a budgeting perspective, and they've been completely supportive. And we consistently have great marks in regards to the way we do our budgeting from our audit folks also. So I'm supportive of the budget. I've had the opportunity to step through it. What I don't support is any type of wholesale defunding of safety and security services at TriMet. As Director Edwards has mentioned, and folks, I'll see if I can get through this without getting choked up, because honestly, the situation that we've been experiencing here over the last month is saddening. It's exhausting, and I'm tired. I'm exhausted from the efforts that we have been putting in for decades in regards to racial equity and inclusion and opportunity. So I start there with the foundation in saying I do not support a wholesale defunding of services. We've gotten great community response on both sides of this conversation. I think we need to be balanced as we go forward. We've got a myriad of data here at TriMet and across the region and across the country in regards to the problem that exists. We can historically, I think, not us as an organization entirely, but as a nation, we've turned a blind eye to the things that need to happen to right the wrongs of what's occurred historically and what continues to occur. So that, in my mind, is an absolute, supported by the myriad of data. But what I don't want to lose, though, is I've been part of TriMet for over 8 years, and it's been an incredible journey. We've in this effort of inclusion and equity, we've won a lot of battles. I can think of a lot of things that we've done to address many of the things that we've heard concerns about. So in that regard, we can't forget all the efforts and all the people who have worked so hard to get us to where we are now. The one thing that I do want to say is I'm absolutely supportive of a broad base of voices, a diversity of voices on the potential Blue Ribbon Committee. Absolutely supportive of that. Although I do want to say it does have to include individuals who have a lifelong lived experience that can opine on the situations that we have experienced and bring some wisdom about what we have seen and what we have experienced. We are in a time that's not been something that's just happened out of the blue. We're in a time that has been the compilation of many years of a bunch of efforts, both in the overt public, in the overt public arena, but also conversations and efforts that have been just the focus, the determination of a bunch of people behind the scenes working really hard so that we can actually get into this moment where we're having clear and open conversations about what we need to do. So with that, we can't silence the voices of those who have been here along with the fight and now need to have the voices amplified because we have been working so hard on this. Again, this isn't something that just magically happened, one day with the sad killing of George Floyd. This is the compilation of many people's efforts. We stand on the shoulders of giants as we sit here today in regards to the concert of voices requiring demanding change. Now, I'll finish with saying that as an agency, we have done a lot to move this effort forward, not just in regards to safety and security, but also in regards to opportunity. We delivered the largest contract in Oregon history to a minority contractor. There's some things we can learn from these efforts and then also move that forward as we continue to support everyone in our contracting. in regards to safety and security, I absolutely believe it has to be reimagined. I'm not going to tell the story, but I will just reference it by saying this. There was an individual who was a police chief that I talked with years ago, and he told me a story. He started by saying, Travis, I'm both ashamed and embarrassed. And then he went on to tell a story about how he got into an aggressive stance because an African-American young man approached him, not in a violent way, not even engaging him, but came into his presence, and he actually prepared his firearm in a way that he doesn't normally do, and he didn't even notice this unconscious subconscious response until he literally had his hand on his sidearm. And he said, Travis, the only reason that I had this unconscious response is because the young man was black. He goes, there was no other reason. I'm being straight and honest with you. And this was his recount of the story. So, as I wrap this up, this cannot be a long process. I've been part of blue ribbon committees that has to weigh a lot of different stuff. Folks, I support the concept that this is something that's been going on for a long time. We have to reimagine and reallocate the efforts that we have. We've got world-class experts that can opine on this, that can talk about it. They've done the research. We need to engage those individuals sooner rather than later. And this should not be a process that goes on for a lengthy time to address what's been going on in our country, in our city, in our towns. We have to address this, as soon as we possibly can. I'm supportive of this budget, and I'm supportive of immediately identifying this blue ribbon committee that we can get going as soon as we possibly can to ensure that we're not out 12, 18, 24 months looking to address something that has been absolutely plaguing our country, our city, our towns, and our agencies for this long.
Thank you, Travis. That was good. Travis, would you like to make a motion to approve our resolution 20-06-26 adopting fiscal year?
26.
Yes, 20-06-26.
So moved. Travis.
Second. Linda, second.
All right. There's some further discussion on this motion or the budget?
So just quickly, in regards to this, I'm assuming that we're going to be looking at some type of resolution for the Blue Ribbon Committee. Does that require some type of resolution?
No.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Let me go to that question a little bit more, because I think Travis is asking is how do we move this forward, and how do we get the board engaged in this process and understand the blue ribbon some more. So I think we've got to do some with the board over the next few weeks.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I had the same concern, and I guess we're going to have to talk to Shelley about how my thoughts were that somehow we come together with the general manager and have those discussions. I don't know how we do that under the ORS, but hopefully Shelley can help us with that.
And that was going to be, thank you. And that was going to be my feedback as well, once we say, okay, here's the approved budget, I would rather see immediately, what are the steps that we need to take as an agency to again, the 3-4 things that we had outlined in terms of reallocation of resources, or the more community outreach, or the committee that is yet to be formed. So those are sort of my thoughts, because I feel like it has to be hand in hand. And we're going to be sending a public statement, right, to the public and to the community that, like, this is the budget that we have adopted, or that we are presumably going to adopt. But this is the responsibility and this is the accountability that we are going to have to those community voices, especially from some of the Black community members and leaders and organizations that have been making some of the demands. So I just wanted to say that I believe it needs to be fast, it needs to be hand in hand. And then just the last piece that I wanted to see is that according to the public, when they try to, again, look at the budget, it's really hard, even me as a board member, it's really hard to know exactly, what are the types of contracts and IGAs that we have, again, with different entities. And so I know that that information was shared, by staff to the board a couple of weeks ago, which I found is helpful. But to the public, if they're curious as to, what are the types of services that are being offered, what's the GS4 versus the PPI, and, all of the different folks who wear various uniforms that are in our system. I feel like that information really needs to be better represented either on our website or either as an addendum to the budget, because it's very hard to kind of dig through and know exactly how many of these contracts that we have budgeted out for.
Kathy?
Yeah.
I serve on a safety and security committee for the board. And one of the things that we've talked about is that there are a lot of different players within the safety and security arena. And sometimes it's difficult for the community to understand what a person's role is. And I know Marla is working right now on coming up with a method of identifying both with a name tag and a label as to what that person's role is, so that the community at large understands when they come upon somebody who represents some kind of safety, just what their role is. And so I agree with you. I think it can be really confusing because there's just so many different pieces and parts to this whole equation.
Yeah, thank you. And I was also trying to digest some of the other additional recommendations from the auditor's report around just all of the different types of folks that we have out there. And so just still trying to digest that information. And I think, again, that information will be really relevant moving forward in terms of, additional policies, management oversight that we need to do as a board.
So to this, if I may, I think this is what John Gardner and Bernie and Marla and team are working on right now, is the construct of, let alone the panel. What does that look like? And we will bring that back to the board, probably through other sessions, because we don't want to wait a month, because we're only meeting once every month, right? So we don't have that kind of time, but we will get the board engaged in that as John gets that game plan outlined, and solicit the board's viewpoints on that to inform us, probably over the next, I'd say, probably it's going to be probably 2 weeks, I suspect, including what are the elements of what's the size of a blue ribbon panel, what are the components we might be looking for, etc. So yes, so stay tuned for more on that piece specifically, particularly over the next 90 days, because we're, as everyone else's points, and very much agree. That's why I put a 90-day time box on it, so it's not 18, 24 months kind of thing. We do have to get at this very quickly, so we will be back to you, I suspect, in very, very short order here, once we've done a bit of the draft, more detailed thoughts.
All right, I don't see any further hands up, but I hear a unanimous kind of call that we need to move on as quickly, and I'm hearing staff say they will be responsive, and the board will have an opportunity to weigh into the Blue Ribbon Committee and the overall charge outcomes and all of that. So we're looking forward to that, and we want to help you be successful on that one, Doug.
Thank you.
So Keith, do I see you raise your hand?
Yes, I'm just a little bit concerned about the board having a conversation so that we can be in lockstep in regards to the nuances of how we're going to go about this. Because I want to make sure that we're all clear on what the expectations are, and clear on what our purpose is in regards to making this happen, and not I'm just concerned that, like I say, I think we all need to make sure that we're on the same page, and that's what I would like to see happen. But I think I would not. I don't think we have the time to do it here today, and so that's the reason I was mentioning before that perhaps Shelley can come up with something so that we can Shelley Divine, I'm speaking of, so that we can have a meeting or a discussion around these particular issues, and so that, like I say, we're moving in lockstep in one direction. Yep. I don't want to be distracted, because some of us I know have different feelings about the security issue. I know I do, and I'm not foolish enough, in my opinion, to want to get rid of all of our policing efforts, but at the same time, they need to be modified, and as Travis and others have said, reimagined and looked at differently and approached from a different perspective. And I think they'll be more effective that way, to be quite honest. But like I say, we need to, I think, all sit down and have that discussion, so that we, have some idea, and it helps, I think, give our general manager direction as well.
Thank you. I think you're right on, and I think that's what I'm hearing from the whole board, is we need to do that. And I think let's leave it to John and Bernie and Doug to talk about this some more. But I see them talking with us individually, and I think, Keith, if we need to get together, all we got to do is give notice, and we can have this same kind of discussion like we did earlier today on making sure we're all on the same page. So I see us seeing more of each other in this format, unless all of a sudden everything's fine, we're cleared to meet physically. But I believe we're going to see a lot of each other in the next few months here.
More of each other despite COVID.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Thank you.
All right. So back to the question. There's a motion and a second on the resolution 20-06-26. How's the board feeling? Are we ready to call a question?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. All those then in favor of the motion to approve resolution 20-06-26, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Thank you very much. And again, this budget is going to be changed, I suspect, as we learn more and more about our revenues and resources over the next few months. So, again, good work, and we look forward to the effort on reimagining safety and security. All right, with that, I'm going to move to the next resolution, resolution 20-06-27, which is authorizing the issuance of payroll tax revenue bonds. Mr. General Manager.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Board President. So as you've outlined, these revenue bonds will provide for us up to $200 million in capital improvement projects. This includes things such as a Columbia bus base, Powell Garage, the Better Red Max line extension and reliability improvements. Now, the board approval here is required under Oregon law, and it also serves for us to complete our legislative approval process. It's a requirement by the FTA, particularly for local governments' share of funding things like the Red Line project specifically. Normally, we'd be building up and then making applications for something like the Red Line, over $200 million. But in this case, the President of the United States kind of circumvented this whole thing and said, by the way, congratulations, you've got essentially $100 million. So we're kind of reverse engineering a bit on that example. So. But overall, though, I think the action helps us. It makes an important step moving that project forward. And it now, with this, would fully commit TriMet's $101 million to match that federal funding. So, again, this is kind of reverse engineering, but it's a project we've all been actually hoping for. And now it's looking extremely real. And I think a really important project for this region's total mobility as we upgrade the network. So the timing on this project is currently in design, and then we'd expect to have construction underway literally as early as this spring, which I'm personally very excited about because it helps us, particularly at a time of high unemployment, with more jobs to come out and shovel-ready jobs to be hitting the deck running. So I think this is really timely and great for this region. So your approval is recommended, and Dee, if I have anything else that you'd like to add, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. I do have a few things that we need to cover. First of all, this action, if approved, will start the 60-day clock running on public review and approval necessary for us to move forward with this. The budget that you just adopted, and thank you very much for that, includes the debt service requirement on a $200 million issue. Now, this does not say that we're going to go right out to the market with a $200 million issue, but what this does is it sets us up to have the ability to catch the market as it progresses up to 200 million. Our plans are to do an issue of about 100 to 110, possibly a little bit more, primarily to cover the capital costs or our share of the Better Red Line Extension project. So that's one key reason. The other key reason, and Dave Unsworth is here to answer any questions you may have about this, is that, as Doug said, since the federal government has actually authorized 99.99 million for this project, but it's subject to us actually passing or submitting an approved engineering contract. And so I believe it's an engineering contract. So what we've got to do, is a construction grant agreement. That's what we have to get approved through FTA.
Correct.
And one condition of that is that first of all, no further board action is required, and that we have commitment. We can demonstrate commitment by the agency to this project. And so by approving this resolution, we believe that does both of those things. So there we are. Dave, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, Dee, you hit it exactly right. So we've got to show the commitment, and with that commitment and other due diligence, we've had a 3-hour meeting earlier this week with FTA and the PMOC on this project. They want to make sure that we're committed before they sign the agreement.
So with that, that's the end of my report.
All right, thank you. Questions by the board? I'm not seeing any. Then is there a motion to approve resolution 20-06-27?
So moved.
That was Travis. Is there a second?
That was Keith. Seconded.
Keith, okay. Thank you very much. Any further discussion on the motion or the resolution? Hearing none then, all in favor of the motion to approve resolution 20-06-27, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is then approved unanimously. Thank you. Let's move on to our final resolution, which is resolution 20-06-28, which is authorizing an amendment to an intergovernmental agreement, as we call them IGAs, with the City of Portland for streetcar operations. Mr. General Manager.
Thank you very much, Mr. Board President. So this specific IGA was established under the Streetcar Master Agreement, which outlines really the understandings between between TriMet, the city regarding our overall split and collective funding responsibilities. Under the agreement itself, the city reimburses TriMet for the cost of our operating staff and services. We also pay the city a percentage of the cost of the streetcar revenue hours. The approval of this contract before you authorizes the IGA for percentages agreed upon that are included in the fiscal 21-year budget that you just approved. The exact amounts, they're outlined in Amendment 11, and it's also further detailed in the resolution memo you've got. The financial impact to us here at TriMet is just under $9 million. The IGA is processed through TriMet's budgeting and finance and legal departments, so there's a whole group of vetting that goes through all this and negotiations that I want to give a lot of credit, frankly, to Brett Rogers, who's hopefully, I think he's here to answer any questions, as well as Nancy Young, Oliver. The two of them have done a great job tag teaming this. So overall, your approval is recommended. And Brett, is there anything that I missed I could have covered here? Feel free to jump in.
No, I think it was good. Thank you.
That's not an approved resolution yet, so Brett, you don't have to celebrate yet.
Questions by the board? I guess I'd say, is there any major differences between this agreement and what we've done in the past? Or
No.
I think this is just reflecting some of the additional needs to operate it and through our existing agreement, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. I'm seeing no hands up nor anybody asking questions. So is there then a motion to approve resolution? I have a motion by Travis.
Yeah, that was Keith.
Keith, okay.
And I'll second.
All right. Thank you very much. Any further discussion on the motion or the agenda? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of the motion to approve resolution 20-06-28, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Aye. Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. So that's the end of our resolutions. We have no ordinances, and I know of no other business to come before the board this morning. Mr. General Manager or other board members, is there anything else to come before us today?
Nothing from the general manager.
We do have a briefing after this, so I'm hearing none. Then I'm going to adjourn our business meeting. And how people doing break wise? We need another 5-minute or 10-minute break.
5 would be good.
That'd be helpful.
Why don't we take a 10-minute break? And I'm looking at my watch. How about we come back at 12:27?
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
Doug, are you leading us off or turning it right over to John?
Yeah. I'll just take a couple quick comments, then we'll turn it to the master of ceremonies, being John. So this is something that we've been working on for a period of time, and that's really trying to look at developing a company fundamental equity lens, our approach, our process around how we do all the elements of our business that we conduct. We're also looking at things on our procurement, our materials management side of things, including applying equity lenses to that. So there's a lot of work into next year that's going to be needed, but today's intended to give you a framework of the current thinking and get your viewpoints and comments on this as well. So John, I'm going to turn it over to you now, maybe just to continue the
Excellent. Thank you, Doug, and good morning, President Warner, members of the board. Thank you again for an opportunity to provide you all an update on our efforts to establish a draft agency equity-wide equity lens. Next slide. First, a little background. As many of you remember, it was just last fall that you all approved TriMet's current Title VI and Civil Rights Program. And for the first time ever, you approved a program that would allow us to develop an agency-wide equity lens over the 3-year term of the program that would be used to inform TriMet's efforts, actions, and investments moving forward. Next slide. Developing an equity lens has been a recommendation from TriMet's Transit Equity Advisory Committee for quite a while and was part of the committee's annual work goals this year. Once the Title VI program was approved, we began working with TIAC and the Center for Equity and Inclusion to think through our processes, research existing models, develop trainings for internal staff and leadership, and build out an approach. What we landed on was the following. TriMet's Equity Lens will function as a practical tool that will help to ensure policies and programs result in equitable outcomes for all community residents. Our Equity Lens will serve as both a process and a tool, and the Equity Lens will be a living document. Next slide. Now, as we began to look into what other transit districts were using, we were at a loss, as most agencies rely on their Title VI program as their equity lens. And although Carl Green, TriMet's Title VI and Civil Rights Program Administrator, has built a nationally recognized best-in-class program, we want to go beyond traditional approaches with our effort. That's why I'm excited to say that with help from TriMet's Senior Coordinator for Community Engagement, Roberto Gutierrez, we landed on 12 equity indicators as our starting goal areas. These goals come from the Mobility Equity Framework, How to Make Transportation Work for People, which was developed by the Greenlining Institute, who was mentioned as a source for best practice approaches by Vivian Satterfield from Veride earlier this morning as part of the conversation. So if you look at the draft areas and focus goals, you'll see the goal 1 is really increase access to mobility, Goal 2, reduce air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. And Goal 3, enhance economic opportunity. And within those goals, you'll see hopefully a lot of familiar trends or areas of focus: affordability, accessibility, efficiency, reliability, and safety. And we'll talk a little bit more about safety later. And a lot of other things that kind of reflect not just hopefully values you all support, but actually efforts and initiatives identified in our business plan. So who knew that best practices by Greenlining also sort of reflect what we've already committed to do as an agency. So we're really excited to sort of begin the conversation based on these goals, knowing that over time the goals could change to better reflect what community is wanting us to focus on as we move forward. Next slide, please. So how do we begin to analyze our goals and efforts across the 12 equity indicators? Again, we look towards best practice, and we'll be basing our process on some of the efforts developed through the Government Alliance on Race and Equity and their Racial Equity Toolkit. So most of the toolkits we've seen or processes essentially follow the same type of question and approach, which is really, what is the proposal and what is the practice or budget decision under consideration? And what are the desired results of those outcomes? And then what does the data show us, both qualitative and quantitative? And what story does that start to create? And then fundamentally, and this was brought up again this morning, was how have we engaged communities in this issue? And are there opportunities to expand or reform or refine that engagement? And ultimately, who will be burdened by this choice and or who benefits, right? Who, as many people are affected, we need to understand that. And then what is the plan to actually operationalize this change? How will this actually be implemented? And then how do we ensure accountability, communicate and evaluate results to all of the stakeholders across the process, both internally and with the community? Next slide. So TriMet has a great foundation to build out these efforts, and that's why we will be integrating our existing 10-factor equity analysis into our tool. As a reminder, this allows us to dive deeper into how our efforts affect individuals, especially in communities of color, or may impact our community across many different rider groups. You know, I think we spoke a lot this morning about how the youth voice, which we're very excited to bring into our conversation, but we can't forget that transit is a meeting place for many different communities, both the elderly, the disabled, folks from limited English populations. And so we need to take all of their feedback and their thoughts in account as we build it out. And we think our 10-factor can really maximize that effort and tell that story and keep us honest to ensure we're engaging folks where they live and what is actually affecting them. Next slide. Another effort that our lens, the new lens, will allow us to put up front and center as we work to integrate it into our approach is our work with limited English proficient communities and the safe harbor populations they represent. TriMet's new equity lens will leverage the work done by Martin Gonzalez, Maria Clemenco, Nathan Jones, and Carl Green, and many others across the agency who helped develop the language access plan that you all approved last fall. And this lens will help us make sure it supports all of our riders, especially those riders who speak English as a second language. Next slide. Now, as we think on where to apply our lens, as you can imagine, there are tons of areas of opportunity. As I said early, we will be piloting the lens, the equity lens process and considerations as we begin building out our community-wide listening sessions meant to inform our thinking and efforts on reforming public safety on the system. These efforts will include working with community-based organization partners and leaders to help TriMet build out the engagement plan and then lead the actual community engagement forums that from an aspect that helps it work on their terms and using the methodology or the vehicles that they think is best suited for their communities. When you look across just a sampling of some areas where we can apply this, staff development, staff hiring, retention, we have a lot of community partners. How can we use the lens to inform those community partners to make sure they're most effective? Agency culture. You know, we ourselves are a work in progress. So training, communication, and internal policies. Our contracting, as Director Stovall said this morning, we still do lead the region in terms of what we do, but can we do more? And there are goals within our business plan that speak to that effort. And our service provision, whether it's the distribution of service, system amenities, or just customer awareness and how we train and prepare our staff to be the best they can with all the stakeholders using our system. What's exciting is we have, as I think Director Stovall said again, a ton of efforts underway that this tool can actually give us an opportunity to refine, enhance, and increase. across many, if not all of the divisions that exist. So this was just meant to show you whether it's the GM division or finance or even construction and engineering, there are many activities already in place that this tool really will streamline and supercharge moving forward. Next slide. So as you imagine, we still have a lot of work ahead of us, but my staff and I are excited to continue to push this forward. This is really meant to give you sort of a high-level snapshot of what's happening. As I said before, Carl Green led some research in terms of what are the other transit properties doing, and he has a strong affinity group of civil rights workers across the country. And in speaking to 92 of them, only 5 had similar efforts. So sometimes, again, with being one of the first ones to do things, we just got to sort of see what works for our community. And that's really what we'll be doing over the summer, is even though we'll have the tool in process as we build out our safety and security conversations, we will still be looking towards other districts and transit properties to see what else can we include in ours. The other piece, and why we're still calling this draft, is it's much easier for folks to edit than write. So we have a lot of socialization to do with this draft tool across hundreds, if not thousands, of community stakeholders over the next few months. So in addition to in-person, to the extent the pandemic allows, and online and other forms our community partners are going to encourage us and help us develop, we're going to rely on a lot of different stakeholder groups that TriMet has established, whether it's tens of thousands of folks who ride our system to the Riders Club, our different forums for TIAC or CAT, our low-income fare participants. Again, we have 24,000 contacts that have given us their information that we can reach out to, or just our access transit providers who provide subsidy for accessing this system on a daily basis to many across the system. We have a wealth of community partners to sort of engage in making sure this tool reflects not just the agency values, but the values of the community. And we're going to continue to work with the Center of Equity and other folks to make sure we have a robust training plan. So as we move this out externally, the agency moves along with it to make sure that our staff and our folks inside have a chance to continue to inform the process. And finally, we want to be able to integrate all that feedback so the tool itself no longer says draft, as we look at what it can do to affect sort of budget considerations and policy and system considerations next year as well. Next slide. So as we move forward, we'll be posting the draft Equity Lens tool in the next few weeks on our agency equity page, which is located at trimet.org/equity. I'm not sure if everyone's seen it, but it's a great look in terms of what the page currently tells in terms of TriMet's story and some existing and historical efforts. But this is a work in progress, but we think we have a really good approach, and we're very excited to start getting this out and putting it to use. So with that, I'll just pause for questions and turn the floor over.
Are there questions by the board? Or do you have a comment first?
Yeah, just a quick one. I would really welcome any comments or ideas the board has, either now or outside, around outside agencies other than us just looking at transit. Because sometimes other industries have models that they've tapped into, whether it be in the medical field or aerospace or others around equity lens. So if others have other experience on that, if we can widen it beyond just transit, I think sometimes you can learn from others. So.
Kathy?
I have a question. Yeah. John, thank you for the presentation. My question was just, again, around the kind of public engagement piece. And I see that we have a new website that we've launched with more information, which is great. But if people want to, you know, in addition to normal board meetings, but if they are not part of TIAC or CAT and they want to learn some regular updates, or they want to take a look at, you know, for the next 6 months, what we're working on, how is that information going to be available? I'm assuming the website, but is there going to be other channels or other ways that the public can get this information?
Yeah, great question. And so one of the things we want to do with the website is we don't want it to be stagnant, the equity page. We want that to be a continuous place for folks to get information about what's happening. We're working with JC Vanen and others to support a TriMet newsletter that's going out. And currently, Roberto Gutierrez has been sending community updates to a few hundred nonprofit and community-based organizations. And we want to sort of pilot something that's more akin to the Rider Club, which is tens of thousands of folks are hearing about updates. And in making sure in each one of those updates, to the extent it makes sense, we have sort of updates around our equity work. Because I think the good and the bad news is it's a very well-kept agency secret, although when you check into it, we're best of class. It is what it is. We just got to do a better job, not only telling our story, but giving an opportunity for community to continue to inform that story. So I think you're right on. We want to spread the word. And that's why even this tool we'll have on the site with the ability for folks to give us comments about, have we seen this? Have we thought about this? Should we go explore what Toronto's doing or Metro is doing, or other public agencies that are maybe ahead of us or have better approaches to moving this work forward?
Keith?
Yes, thank you. Is there an advisory committee that fills that, or a group that fills that space, or does TIAC fill that space?
So TIAC is our primary advisory group in terms of informing the agency on sort of equitable approaches to increasing access and a lot of the system changes we make. So we are in the process of updating our TIAC roster. So if there are organizations that you think need to be constantly brought to the table on a monthly basis to make sure we're hearing from them and the communities they represent, please forward me those organizations. We'd love to reach out to them. I mean, it's right now we're about 16 members, but I think we can get to 20 or so. And that's just the formal convening. We're always interested in hearing from agencies or thought leaders across the communities who have ideas to improve our efforts. So they can connect to me directly.
If you could send me a list of who's currently participating, and then perhaps I can have some other folks that may be able to get involved and help you along those lines.
Of course, and we'll send that to all the board members. Thank you. Other questions?
Yeah, I'm looking for raised hands here. I'm just wondering how you're going to be working more than 24 hours a day in the next few months, John.
Well, that's a great question. First, I have a fantastic team and department, and Doug Kelsey and Bernie Bottomley are really investing in sort of supporting not just the equity lens, but also this community-wide conversation that we're getting ready to kick off. So we have a lot of support and hands that are going to lift this burden with me.
All right, thanks. Glad to hear that, because we don't want to burn you out. Other questions by the board? All right, well, there's going to be more to come on this, right, John?
Oh, yes, a lot more.
Yep.
Bruce, I raised my hand, but I know
Oh,
that's
I'm sorry,
hard.
I didn't see that.
No, that's okay. It's hard to follow on doing two things at once. You know, John, I just think this is excellent. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. I mean, we've heard language like our equity lens, but this helps to kind of create a framework for all of us to better understand. And I just think that this is just excellent work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, now I see Ozzy's hand, so I'm getting better here.
Thanks. And I simply wanted to recognize the work of John Gardner, Roberto, Maria, and the team that's working through community engagement and language access, and Carl and the Title VI work, because collectively, this is starting to show up in us getting better able to not only get information out into broader groups in the community, but to get information back from them, and getting meaningful feedback is something we need to get better at in every language. English is included in that. But the opportunity to start seeing the way TriMet staff is engaging in other languages has been fantastic. I got to sit in on the listening session that was held in Spanish. And you know, we're still working the logistics of making it work in a digital format and all of that. But I have to just commend the staff in being able to articulate the agency, what's going on, and to respond to people's questions in Spanish. It just felt like a watershed moment for me. So I just want to express how wonderful it is. And I could imagine there's people in the community that are only going to get closer to being able to provide input because of that work. So thank you.
Bruce,
Yes.
this is Linda again. There's something I wanted to mention when I came onto the board and I began to learn more about what this agency is about and what we've done since I've been on the board. One of the things I noted was that transit agencies don't always tell their story, and that there was a lot of community perception that we weren't doing things that we were doing. And, this is a perfect example where I feel like as a board, particularly recently, all we hear is all that we aren't doing, but yet in many cases we are doing it. And so I just want to applaud anything that we do with JC and his team, and John with your group, and all of the groups that push information out to the public. I mean, the public has filters, and so we may provide it, but they may not see it because they're overloaded with information. But this is the kind of thing that tell our story, tell what we're doing, engage people to engage with us, that I think is just absolutely critical. And we have come so far in the short time I've been on the board in terms of just highlighting all that we do. I remember being in a meeting and coming back and talking to the former general manager about low-income housing or subsidized housing, and learning all of a sudden that we were providing our land, to developers of low-income housing. Had no idea about that. And so, there's just so, listening to Travis, when I think about all that we have done, it doesn't mean that we're done. It just means that sometimes we need to acknowledge that we're in process and working towards things, and everybody's heart is in the same place. We all want the same thing. And it helps to all of us to help the community understand all that we have done. So when people start complaining to me about things, I try to bring forward information about what we have accomplished on behalf of the entire community in terms of equity, diversity, inclusion. And so I think we all have an obligation as board members to learn what we're doing, and then to really share that information within the communities in which we are a part. And that only helps to tell the TriMet story, not that TriMet isn't doing a good enough job on its own. So that was the only comment I wanted to make.
I might just add on, if I may, just I think a few weeks ago, Metro was out as part of its polling, and there was a poll done around how is TriMet seen compared to all other government agencies, Metro, the federal government, City of Portland, the ODOTs, etc. And once again, just to build on Linda's comment, Director Simmons' comment, that in fact, TriMet is actually the highest rated government agency in the evaluation. And so not by what we think, it may not, we have imperfections like every business, it never ends. And as long as our trajectory of evolution is heading the right way, we know we've got a lot of work to do, but sometimes you have to pause and look at the view you've actually come from. And so right now, I think we've got a 71% very, very favorable rating, which is, again, the highest in all of the region, as by the citizens. So everyone should be very proud, but we have an immense amount of work to do. So.
That's good.
Also, in the surveys of riders, aren't I correct that the majority of the riders feel safe?
Correct. Correct.
Keith, do you still have your hand up? Did you want to have another comment?
Yes, please. Thank you very much. And I agree that, that we've been doing a very good job, but I want to say that we're doing a great job. And I think when we're doing a great job, we're going to have those disenfranchised communities that are going to be the ones that are going to be our judges and say that we've got a 71% rating, because I think that's where it has to come from. Those communities that have been marginalized and have had to endure all this threat of racial injustice that's occurred in this country for so long. And TriMet has been doing, like I say, a yeoman's job in trying to correct some of those things in regard to our realm and our world. But at the same time, that's the reason I always try to encourage us to make sure that we are including folks that are being impacted or negatively impacted, and certainly those communities that typically don't have a voice. And when you include them and you start hearing things, just like, and I have to go back to George Floyd, because of COVID, we were all able to see a black man lynched 2020 style in our living rooms, in our homes. And that's what has made the difference in this movement. And that shouldn't have had to happen that way for it to get to where we are. But at the same time, when we include communities of color, when we include low income, when we include LGBTQ, when we include transgender, those folks are being impacted in a negative way that sometimes I don't know about. I'm not transgender, I'm not LGBTQ. And so I have to talk to someone and get their perspective on those particular issues and how they're impacted in a negative way, because it's something that maybe we're not doing. And I do understand that, we spend a lot of money oftentimes supporting groups in a financial way, but we've got to start developing relationships and partnerships with the organizations, because that will go a lot further than our dollars. And at the same time, it'll help alleviate the strain on our budget if we start creating those relationships, because those relationships will go a lot further than those dollars will ever go.
All right, any final comments or thoughts for John or the board?
Just something from Linda for Keith. Keith, are you familiar with the role of our TAC committee?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so because that's one avenue that TriMet has. I mean, there was a day that TAC was very, very small, and now it's bigger. And I mean, and part of that is to try to pull in the community voices from various groups to help us better plan and make policy decisions and things. And so I think the opportunity John is giving us to take a look at the current representation and make suggestions as to other folks that need to come forward, because people's time is really in many cases overextended. And so if we can bring voices from organizations that represent communities, that's their job, to try to pull their constituent group and represent those views to us as an agency. Because as much as we go out to the community and meet with people, it's not always it's an individual perception. It's not an organized perception of that of a particular group of people. So I think this is a great opportunity for us as a board to take a look at the TAC committee and help the agency look at where we are missing finding a voice from the community.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. If I may, I'm glad you mentioned that, Linda, because in fact I am in another meeting right now, and but I did want to also mention the fact that you're talking about if I go out and talk to people in my district, I only have my perspective to come back with, and sometimes it's going to get lost in translation. And so that's the reason that there has to be an opportunity for them to perhaps even have a representative that speaks and has a different experience than I've had, and can perhaps articulate their message even better. Also, it just popped into my head, and I don't know how much houseless people use TriMet, but I'm sure that they do.
Mhm.
And I would venture to say that we have no one on any of our committees that is houseless. And that's a challenge, but it's a challenge that certainly we can try to meet. So I think that's something we need to think about as well.
Ozzy?
Thank you, thank you. Great points. I'm thrilled at the discussion, and I'd like to take the opportunity to give you some updates on conversations that we've started to have within TIAC, exactly about what we want to do to expand. And I want to build on some ideas that Linda just presented that we have not discussed, frankly. Um, we recognize the purpose of TIAC is to build those bridges with the neighborhood through constituent organizations. And the focus thus far has been in bringing in constituent organizations that represent hard to reach populations with high transit ridership or with high transit dependent rider populations. And that there's still work left to be done in that area alone. We still have regions in the TriMet boundary that don't yet have a community organization that represents their geography, for example. So we want to make sure that we're capturing transit-dependent riders in East County of Portland, as well as in the far reaches of Washington County that are within the region. So those are steps that we're moving forward on. But I heard something very interesting now in recognizing that there's going to be some perspectives that may not have an organization that we can reach out to that becomes their constituency group. I'm not aware of an LGBTQ focused transit ridership organization that we can reach out to help us build that sort of feedback loop. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to reach out in a specific way to perhaps organizations or individuals or leaders of community groups that we want to be able to have some direct feedback from. And those are the kinds of conversations that we're having now at TIAC. I'm not sure where we say what the process will be for inviting new members in, where we identify the priorities for who to reach out to. But that's the kind of conversation we're trying to have. The objective being that we try to get a good network of bridges with community groups that represent not only geographically different riders throughout the region, but that also represent different types of parts of our community, different types of riders with different perspectives, different sets of needs. And this is where I invite anyone on the board to please feel free to reach out to myself. John Gardner does direct and oversee TIAC's membership. So either one of us, I think, are fair game. If you have an idea of a group or a voice that you feel really needs to have a bridge with TriMet, that is the best indication we can get of how to build TIAC in a stronger way.
All right.
John, good work.
Thank you.
Looking forward to this as it moves on. Mr. General Manager, is there anything else that we need to talk about this morning? Or this afternoon, I guess.
Actually, we're now into this afternoon. And I just I have nothing else to add, so perhaps to discuss. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And Bruce, if I could, I just want to thank everybody for their indulgence in this meeting. I think this has been a very productive meeting. We've got a lot of work that we've got ahead of us, but I think we're going to be fine. And I just appreciate the conversation that we've had this morning and the discussions that we've had. So I look forward to the work ahead.
Good. Thank you very much. Anything else by anybody? All right. Well, thank you very much for your time and again, good work on everybody's part. I enjoyed the conversation also. I'm going to leave the event.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.